Chapter 348. Seeing the guards hurriedly close the back door, Xiao Xian didn't slow down. Instead, he sped up. If possible, Xiao Xian wanted to climb over the wall, but he couldn't. Not only was the wall high, exceeding Xiao Xian's jumping range, it was also very smooth. It was deliberate. He could use other tools to climb over, but that would slow him down. Once he slowed down, Xiao Xian would be in danger of being shot into a sieve. Since he couldn't climb over the wall, he could only use brute force. Fortunately, there was only one door. Seeing the figure rushing towards the back door, the guards at the back door couldn't help but feel nervous. They couldn't see what the person looked like because he was too fast. Their eyes couldn't keep up with him. They only felt that he was only one person, not a giant, but he gave them a sense of crisis and oppression, as if they were facing a giant beast. This wasn't the Colosseum, and there was only one person. There was no need to worry, no need to be afraid, it would be fine. As long as the kid came over, everyone would work together to cut him down. If the guy chose to climb over the wall, the guards on the other side of the door had already prepared their bows and arrows. They were all pointing at the top of the wall. As long as the guy climbed over, they would shoot. He was getting closer and closer. The guards' faces twitched due to excessive nervousness. Their eyes were fixed on the figure rushing over, and they roared in their hearts, "Impossible." The guy actually chose to go head-on. There were actually two doors at the back door. When they heard the commotion just now, they closed one door and didn't close the other because they felt that it was unnecessary. One stone door was enough to stop the intruder. However, at this moment they suddenly felt uncertain. It was too late to close the second door. As Xiao Xian rushed to the back door, he also crazily mobilized the totemic power in his body. Even after reaching the limit, he still didn't stop. The accumulated power was squeezed again and again. The surging totemic power rushed to every part of his body, but it couldn't find a place to vent. It was like a volcano that was about to erupt, but was forcibly sealed. The magma in the mountain was constantly accumulating, waiting to erupt. Xiao Xian's aura also skyrocketed because of the unceasing accumulation of power and the surging blood in his body. The closer he got to the back door of the palace, the more obvious the cracks on the stone slabs on the ground became. The crunching sounds were like gears moving forward. The guards who were still guarding the door saw this scene and couldn't help but move to the side. They didn't dare to resist. At the moment of explosion, the moment he exploded, he suddenly let out a long howl. Xiao Xian. He shot straight towards the closed door in front of him like a cannonball and threw a fierce punch. Boom. The ground seemed to vibrate. Ants. Was. And the person who had made SSS had already rushed S. The guards by the door turned their necks mechanically and stared at the hole that had just been forcefully opened. They felt that this hole was like the bloody mouth of a giant beast. It was terrifying, and the person who had opened this hole was even worse than the giant beast. Too terrible. One of the guards hurriedly wiped away the sweat on his forehead as he recalled the power of the collision with the palace gate. The sound of the collision seemed to be reverberating in his ears. It was as if his soul was about to be shaken by the impact. Outside the palace, the row of people who were staring at the wall with their bows and arrows were also stunned by this sudden scene. A moment ago, they were still staring at the wall, and the next moment, they heard a sound that almost made their hearts jump out of their throats, accompanied by a burst of stones that were spurting out. Then, they only felt a blur in front of their eyes. An elusive figure flashed, and everything was over. Not only the guards at the back door, but at this time, some people were lurking outside the palace, hiding near some of the houses closer to the palace, observing the palace's movements. They were not the people of Snowfield City. When they heard the movement in the palace before, they were still wondering what had happened inside. They wondered if their accomplices who had sneaked into the palace had been discovered in advance. Before they came, they were also told by the young master how to avoid Bailuo. If they failed again, they really did not dare to go back to see the young master. If they failed, they could only give up this mission. However, they did not expect that they would see someone break through the back door of the palace. The people who stared over there were all shocked. Unexpectedly, the back door of the Snowfield Palace was broken. Where the hell did this barbarian come from? At this time, the Snowfield King was in the palace. Listening to the messy sounds coming from his ears, the Snowfield King, who wanted to take a rest, was now not sleepy. Enduring his anger, he listened to the report of his subordinates. The expression on his face became more and more terrifying. In the huge hall, there was a dignified sense of oppression. Everyone did not dare to breathe. The people of Snowfield City were relatively white among the desert cities. But at this time, the Snowfield King, because of several defeats, being provoked again and again, and hearing about the disturbance and the intruder who had successfully sneaked in and broke out, was so angry that his face was red and his blue veins were about to jump out. After the slave who reported to him finished, he stood there trembling, waiting for the king's instructions. So many people, yet they couldn't catch a small intruder? The Snowfield King gritted his teeth, almost growling. He escaped too fast. The slave who answered choked back his words under the Snowfield King's angry gaze. If the intruder was exposed at night, they might really be able to catch him. However, the guards at night had not joined in, so some places were inevitably weaker. Moreover, it was said that the intruder's strength was extraordinary, and he even directly broke through the palace gates. Kicking the person in front of him, the Snowfield King was like an angry lion, roaring out, "I want him to die." This time, the Snowfield King thought of the loss of the core seed, and his lungs were about to explode. Regardless of the person who was kicked, the Snowfield King turned to the people and said, "Jinjiawi. Take out 200 Jinjiawi. If they don't kill the intruder, they don't have to come back." The reason why they were called Jinjiawi was not because their whole body was golden, but because this team was the only one fully equipped with metal weapons. The Jinjiawi was a group of people personally trained by the Snowfield King after he came to power. There were a total of 1,000 people. 500 were transferred to the front line to fight with the people of the Fire Hill, and the remaining 500 stayed in the city. Now the Snowfield King, for an intruder, sent 200 Jinjiawi to chase him down. Why bother? Guarding other places in the city was fine. Why chase a person who had already escaped? Wasn't it a waste? Maybe it was a trick of other cities? Someone next to him tried to persuade him, but he did not have the courage and could only pretend to be dumb. The Jinjiawi may not be ranked in the top of the Snowfield City in terms of individual combat effectiveness, but they were absolutely loyal and resolutely carried out the king's orders. Under the Snowfield King's command, the Jinjiawi, who were on standby, put on their equipment and rode out on their riding beasts. In order to accurately find the target, they took away more than 20 by Luo. Gulyalu, on the side of the palace, a heavy stone door that was usually closed opened. 200 people wearing metal armor, riding on their riding beasts, rushed out in a line. Jinjiawi. They actually dispatched the Jinjiawi. Who was that just now? It can make the Snowfield King send out the Jinjiawi. I don't know, I can't guess. No matter who that person is, no matter which city he comes from, he has attracted the attention of the Snowfield City anyway. He also took away a part of the Jinjiawi. We can also take advantage of this opportunity to complete the task given to us by the young master, to attack the Snowfield Palace. Some of them had already infiltrated the Snowfield Palace. When the time came, as long as there was an inside and outside cooperation, they would certainly make the Snowfield people shed a layer of skin. Once this side was in chaos, it would be impossible to provide strong support to the front line. Xiao Xian, who did not know that the Snowfield King had issued a kill order, was now only aiming to leave the city. Many people in the city only heard the movement on the side of the palace, but because this kind of thing often happened since the beginning of the war, they were curious and no longer paid attention to it. Naturally, the palace guards were busy on the side of the palace, so they did not care. Many people only saw a flash of a figure and did not see who was running in the end. Even if they went forward to stop him, they could not stop him. Either their speed could not keep up, or their strength could not win. As soon as they went up, they were hit. Xiao Xian ran, breaking through the obstacles in front of him. At this time, the city gate was not closed. It was now dusk, and other people who went out to patrol would come back one after another. No one let them close the city gate. Several guards were still talking about whether there was another assassination on the side of the palace. Suddenly, they heard a whoosh, like a gust of wind sweeping past. The speed of the person running past was like a hurricane. The wind and waves that were brought up rolled up a layer of snow on the sand, like scattering flowers behind the running person. What's going on? Just now, it seems that someone ran past. They wanted to chase, but looking at the momentum, they certainly could not catch up, so they simply did not chase. Could it be the assassin on the side of the palace? Then should we close the city gate? What's the use of closing it now? They all ran away. But if there are other assassins, won't they all be let go? The people at the city gate discussed. Finally, the leader decided to close the gate first. If there were people patrolling outside, they would open it again. However, when they closed the gate halfway, they heard the sound of footsteps. When they looked over, they were almost scared to death. Jinjiawi, it's the Jinjiawi. Hurry up, open the city gate. The leader hurriedly opened the half-closed gate again. 200 Jinjiawi, a pair of indifferent and emotionless eyes, looked straight ahead, ruthlessly strangling the people who obstructed their progress, even if these people were the people of Snowfield City. The collision of the metal and the tearing of the flesh, with a cruel and bloody aura, rushed straight forward like a meat grinder, making the slaves in Snowfield City tremble in fear and tremble. The timid ones hid in the corner of the house, as if they were thinking of some fearful memories. They covered their ears, trying to resist the sounds outside. The bolder ones listened to the sound of blood spraying and the stabbing of spears, guessing how many people outside did not have time to escape and were directly strangled. Chapter 349. After Xiao Xian escaped from Snowfield City, he recalled the maps he had seen in the stone room before. He did not plan to go to several cities in the desert. Now no city was peaceful. Besides, for the tribesmen, those slave owners had never had a good attitude. Even Su Luan had other purposes. Therefore, Xiao Xian's route now did not have any contact with the city under the control of any slave owner. He wanted to stay as far away from those troubles as possible. Originally, Xiao Xian also wanted to go to the seaside. The planned route would lead to the sea closest to Snowfield City. However, when Xiao Xian noticed the people behind him, he could only put down other thoughts and escape. There were 200 Jinjiawi. If Xiao Xian wanted to deal with them, he could break them one by one. However, this group of Jinjiawi almost never acted separately. They probably knew their own shortcomings. The Jinjiawi came out as a complete whole, which made Xiao Xian unable to find the right time to start. Moreover, Xiao Xian could feel that those Jinjiawi were like death soldiers. They seemed to know no fear, and kept chasing until the task was completed. If there was a way to deal with those by Luo, Xiao Xian would not have been chased by the pursuers. However, those by Luo were very smart. They never left the Jinjiawi. When they found something unusual, they would drill into the Jinjiawi team and hide. It was difficult, really difficult. Since entering the desert, Xiao Xian was chased for the first time in such a difficult situation. He escaped quickly, but those by Luo could always find him accurately. No matter if he used clothes to make dummies or applied other scents to his body, he could not get rid of the Bailuo. No wonder the blind old slave said that once you were targeted by the Bailuo, it would be difficult to escape. Xiao Xian couldn't think of a good solution at the moment. He could only use his advantage in speed to alleviate the current predicament. He thought that if he took this group of people to other cities, he would let them kill each other. But before Xiao Xian could lead them there, he encountered two groups of people from Shaki City and Skywheel City fighting each other. Contrary to Xiao Xian's expectations, when the three groups met, they did not continue to fight each other. Instead, the three groups joined forces to chase after Xiao Xian. This gave Xiao Xian an even bigger headache. The two teams that had been fighting energetically followed the Golden Armor Guards and gave chase. They felt that since Snowfield City could send the Jinjiawi to kill a person, that person must be very special. How special? For example, stealing some good things from Snowfield City? Everyone wanted to fish for benefits. The people of Shaki City and Skywheel City did not care about fighting with each other. They wanted to catch the person who might have the treasure before the other side, and then go back to the city to receive the reward from the king. With such a thing, Xiao Xian did not expect them to fight each other. He could only think about how to get out of this predicament. He had long left the jurisdiction of Snowfield City. There was no snow, and the temperature in the surrounding desert was very high. Xiao Xian stepped on the hot sand under his feet and came to the shadow of the sand dune to take a break. There was not much time left for him to rest. Rustle! The sand on the sand dune slid down. Xiao Xian looked at it vigilantly. He had been hiding his breath very well. Even when he was resting, he did not make any big movements. However, for some of the beasts in the desert, Xiao Xian could not detect them every time. These beasts hid very well under the sand. In the process of Xiao Xian running all the way, he almost stepped on the snakes and scorpions that buried their bodies in the sand. The difference was that at this time, what climbed out of the sand dune was not a small beast, but a giant beast. Xiao Xian had already retreated the moment he saw the movement there. Puff! The giant beast snorted, and 2 sand arrows were ejected from the giant beast's nostrils, piercing into the sand not far away. Looking at the figure of the giant beast, Xiao Xian had a sense of familiarity. The giant beast, which had just been sleeping in the sand dune, noticed that someone was there. It immediately let out a dissatisfied scream, like the wind blowing sand. However, when it saw Xiao Xian's appearance, the roar came to an abrupt end. The horned lizard beast that was stuck in the middle of roaring. Xiao Xian. If it were not for the current situation, Xiao Xian really wanted to say hello to this. Yo, long time no see. This giant beast was the horned lizard beast that he had seen in the Colosseum. However, at this time, there were no traces of red around its eyes. It was probably washed away by the sand. When the Colosseum was chaotic, many ownerless giant beasts ran away. Among them was the horned lizard beast that Xiao Xian confronted in the Colosseum. However, Xiao Xian did not expect to meet it here. Xiao Xian was also worried about this horned lizard beast's revenge. However, the horned lizard beast was more worried than Xiao Xian. At that time, the feeling of fear in the Colosseum was still clear in its mind. These giant beasts did not mainly remember people by looking at their appearance, but also their breath and the power fluctuations around their body. One man and one beast were in a deadlock, guarding against each other until a blue beetle drilled out of the ground, breaking the frozen atmosphere at this moment. The horned lizard beast turned and ran away. Xiao Xian, who was relieved, turned his attention to Sapphire. From the beginning of the successful enslavement, the beetle's carapace was as bright as a gem even when it pushed a dung ball. However, now it was more embarrassed than Xiao Xian. He did not know what it encountered under the sand. Its carapace was deeply concave. If it was deeper, it would be life-threatening. Even if the current injury was not life-threatening for the time being, for this beetle, the injury was very serious. Its wings were damaged and it could no longer fly. Although they spent most of their time on the ground or under the sand, they could still fly to avoid disaster when they encountered a critical situation. But now, if this beetle encountered another desert beast, it didn't need to be that big. A slightly more ferocious beast could pose a great threat to it. Xiao Xian knew that Sapphire carried a lot of beetles, but the other beetles could not keep up with its speed and fell far behind. Xiao Xian did not know the scale of Sapphire's insect army, but he could be sure that if it was the same size as before, it could not stop the 200 Jinjiawi and the 2 teams from the other 2 cities. There was no hope. Carefully looking at the injuries on Sapphire's body, Xiao Xian did not know what to do. If it was an animal such as a wolf or a lion, he could still know some ways to deal with it. However, he had no way to deal with the insect's injuries. What about your injuries? Xiao Xian looked at the injury on Sapphire's back and sighed. Sapphire scratched the ground and crawled to Xiao Xian. It did not know how to express itself, so it could only circle Xiao Xian. Fortunately, Xiao Xian could feel its thoughts. Unlock it again? Xiao Xian was not at ease. How long had it been since the second lock was unlocked? If he unlocked the third lock now, would it be able to take it? If it could not control the power in its body, it would die. However, looking at Sapphire's injuries and its cautious and eager look, Xiao Xian decided to fulfill its wish. If its injuries could heal after unlocking the third lock, it would be worth it. Such injuries. Just like when Caesar was heavily injured, Xiao Xian had engraved Caesar and healed Caesar's injuries. Perhaps unlocking it would have the same effect. However, it was also very risky. If he was not careful, he would die. Blue flames emerged from his hands. Xiao Xian tried his best to concentrate and control the power of unlocking. Looking at the excited blue beetle, Xiao Xian thought to himself, I can only wish you good luck. Chapter 350. After the third lock was successfully unlocked, whether Sapphire could survive or not depended on itself. Originally, Xiao Xian thought he could get the result in a short time. However, after the third lock was unlocked, Sapphire seemed to be asleep. It did not respond to the outside world and was in a state similar to dormancy. Xiao Xian was not at ease and planned to wait, but he had already heard the movements of the Jinjiawi. Xiao Xian admired the persistence of the Jinjiawi who were chasing after them. This was already the 10th day. In addition to looking for food and a short rest, the Jinjiawi spent the rest of their time chasing. Not only the Jinjiawi, but even the Jinjiawis riding beasts that looked like camels and horses also had excellent endurance. They could withstand the cold and heat and could run for a long time. As for the people of Shaki City and Skywheel City, who were originally following closely behind the Jinjiawi, they were getting further and further away. Seeing that Sapphire still did not move, Xiao Xian could not carry it and run. After all, the people and beasts behind him were chasing after him, not the beetle. Xiao Xian lifted Sapphire and put it on a sand dune. The surrounding sand moved towards Sapphire and hit it. The target of the Bailuo was Xiao Xian. As for other things besides Xiao Xian, they did not care and ignored them all. The team chased after Xiao Xian, bringing a burst of sand and dust. The Bailuo made a sharp beep sound, flapping its wings and pointing its long nose at Xiao Xian. When the dust dissipated, the place was restored to its original state. The fierce wind blew the sand on the sand dune to other places. Soon, there were no traces of human activity. Xiao Xian felt that he had found a dead end for himself. Escaping to the left was the jurisdiction of Shaki City. Running to the right was the area of Skywheel City. Around here, he could already see some of the Skywheel pillars that were not growing very well. Xiao Xian didn't know why he had run in this direction. When he came back to his senses, he realized that he had foolishly put himself in a dead end. He clearly knew that he shouldn't be careless when he was running for his life. The desert was so big that even if he led the Jinjios behind him to take a detour, he could still find an opportunity to run back and break through this situation. However, as soon as he started running, Xiao Xian felt that his consciousness was out of control, and he directly ran forward. There were birds flying in the sky. They were not wild birds in the desert, but birds domesticated by the people of Skywheel City. There were also people on the back of the birds. Although Skywheel City did not launch a fierce large-scale war with other cities and only had some small friction with Sanchi City, it was also affected by the tense situation in the desert. Every day, there would be a patrol team going out to investigate. Now, Xiao Xian encountered a patrol team from Skywheel City. On the right, there was a patrol team from Skywheel City lying in ambush. Behind him, there were Jinjios chasing after him. And in front of him, there was a cliff by the sea. It was reasonable to say that normal people should run to the left at this time, but Xiao Xian ran straight forward. In the eyes of others, he was really like a madman who was courting death. At this moment, Xiao Xian felt that his legs were not his own. He couldn't control them and rushed straight forward. His mind couldn't think of anything else until the moment he jumped. Xiao Xian suddenly woke up. Unfortunately, he had already jumped. Falling from a high place, he fell into the blue sea and sank. Xiao Xian felt as if someone was dragging him down, and he was falling. Compared to the desert outside, the surrounding seawater was much colder. From the scorching desert to the sudden contact with seawater, and the deeper he sank, the lower the temperature became. The difference in temperature made Xiao Xian shiver uncontrollably. Originally, he planned to go upstream, but found that it had little effect. The water around him was flowing. This kind of water flow made Xiao Xian's scalp tingle. He was too clear about what this water flow meant. He held his breath and stopped the movements of his hands, not daring to move. The huge figure came closer from afar. The light above the sea allowed Xiao Xian to see the stripes on its body, as well as the fangs exposed from its huge mouth. Xiao Xian couldn't even compare to the other side's teeth. There were no claws, but the fin-like limbs did not reduce the power of this giant beast. Being stared at by those eyes, the timid soul probably flew away. The other side seemed to be uninterested in Xiao Xian, such a small person. It just swam around and did not leave. What made Xiao Xian even more desperate was that after he stopped paddling, the speed of his descent became faster. Even if his ability to hold his breath was good, it was impossible to hold in the sea forever. If this continues, he won't be able to leave alive. At this time, outside the sea, on the cliff, the golden armor guards who had chased after them gathered at the edge of the cliff. They looked at the endless blue sea and did not jump down. They were not stupid, so how could they follow them down to their deaths? The riding beasts seemed to feel the pressure under the sea and uneasily stomped their hooves. After appeasing the riding beasts, the leader of the Jinjiawi led everyone to separate and watch Xiao Xian. Once he appeared, they would shoot him. Not far away, the people of Skywheel City were stunned by Xiao Xian's actions. Someone actually went straight to the cliff and jumped down from it. Was this looking for death, or was it looking for death? The giant beast in the sea seemed to be aware of the many people on the cliff. It was very unhappy about this. It rushed out of the water and turned over. With a roar, the rocks on the cliff collapsed. Even if the Jinjiawi were not afraid of death, they could not help but retreat a few steps with their riding beasts. The people of Skywheel City, who were not far away, were even more straightforward and directly retreated 100 meters. Living in this place, they knew very well what was below. It was an unshakable creature, far from the giant beasts in the desert. The Jinjiawi, who had been ordered by the king to die, wandered on the edge of the cliff for 2 days. They did not see Xiao Xian again, so they inferred that Xiao Xian should have been swallowed by the giant beast in the sea. This was also an indirect completion of the king's order, right? On the 3rd day, the leader of the Jinjiawi waved his hand. Go back. The task was completed, so naturally it was time to go back. As for the people of Skywheel City who were lying in ambush, they wanted to rob the equipment of the Jinjiawi. Unfortunately, in the end, they did not have the courage. They hesitated and saw that the Jinjiawi had gone away. Forget it, let's wait for another chance next time. A man from Skywheel City said. Their patrol team did not have enough people. The number of people was not much more than the Jinjiawi. If they really fought, they would definitely lose. You say, the man who jumped was eaten by the giant beast or sank? Someone asked. Who cares, it's just a madman. The people of Skywheel City went back. This trip was peaceful, and the road back to the city was smooth. The Jinjiawi was not as lucky as the people of Skywheel City. Returning along the same road, they were blocked by a group of insects. Looking around, a large number of black beetles covered the sand. Boom! On a sand dune, the yellow sand was lifted. The blue carapace gradually revealed itself, and with the appearance of this beetle, the originally calm black tide of insects surged like waves. In Snowfield City, because some people attacked the palace a while ago, the losses were heavy. The Snowfield King, who was rarely injured, sat there with a gloomy face. He did not have a good complexion. He was also calculating the time, wondering why the Jinjiawi sent out had not come back. Chapter 351. When the Jinjiawi was sent out, the Snowfield King said, If you don't kill him, you don't have to come back. However, he was really angry. If he did not kill them, he would not kill all the Jinjiawi that he had painstakingly trained. However, what he did not expect was that his angry words would become a fact. In terms of individual combat strength, the Jinjiawi was indeed not outstanding. They were good at group battles, but the targets of their group battles had always been people and large desert beasts, not those small insects that could flexibly drill in and out of their armor and clothes. At the moment when the insect tide attacked, the Jinjiawi, who had always been calm, also panicked. The formation could not be maintained. The riding beasts that were bitten by the insects violently stomped their hooves, dodging left and right, but still could not get rid of the more and more intense pain. The chaotic formation of the Jinjiawi had dissipated a lot. Coupled with the riot of the riding beasts, the scene was even more unbearable. The Bailuo that had been hiding in the Jinjiawi originally relied on their wings to fly in the air to avoid the disaster. Unexpectedly, before they could fly high, they were thrown down by the beetles that spread their wings. These Bailuo were just domesticated tracking beasts, not combat type. Under the sweeping of the insect tide, it was difficult to resist. The screams, the beeping of the Bailuo, and the clanging of metal were endless. However, the battle did not last long. Those who could break out in a short time had successfully escaped the encirclement of the insect tide. Those who missed the opportunity, even if they could still hold on, could not last long. The pain of being bitten by the insects meant that they had become the food of these insects. Soon, they would only become a skeleton. The people who broke out of the insect tide were injured and rushed in the direction of Snowfield City. As long as they could reach the territory of Snowfield City, they would be much safer. However, they were unlucky. As soon as they escaped from the insect tide, they encountered the people who had attacked Snowfield City several times. When encountering the Jinjiawi, those people may not easily start, but when encountering the Jinjiawi who were in a difficult situation, not making a move was simply a waste of the knife in their hands. After waiting for a few days, the Snowfield King finally could not help but feel the disappearance of the Jinjiawi. The Jinjiawi were personally enslaved by the Snowfield King himself. If they were ordinary low-level slaves, although he could feel it, he would not care. Whether those people were assassinated or because of other accidents, he was not interested in paying attention. Anyway, there would be slaves dying every day. If they were not important slaves, he would be too lazy to pay attention. However, the golden armor guards were different. Ever since he sent them out, he had been paying close attention to them until the connection between him and the golden armor guards was forcefully cut off by the scythe of the Grim Reaper. Then he was hit by a dull hammer, causing him to have a splitting headache, and he could no longer remain calm. Bewilderment, panic, and disbelief. The Snowfield King suppressed all kinds of emotions in his heart and sent out a team of people to look for the Jinjiawi. Even if they only found the bodies, he wanted to know how those people were killed and where they were killed. The people who went out followed the route that the Jinjiawi had used to chase Xiaoxian. They searched all the way, but they never found any traces. The people who attacked the Jinjiawi had already erased the traces. Not even a bone or a stone would be left. Coupled with the desert climate and sandstorms, when the Snowfield King sent people to look for them, nothing was left. The team looking for the Jinjiawi came to the place where the Jinjiawi had encountered the insect tide and found some traces. However, when they saw those, everyone had the same feeling, as if they were in an ice cellar. Under the scorching sun, they only felt the chill on their backs rising sharply. Their teeth chattered as they looked at the situation in front of them. They shivered and did not even have the courage to go forward. On the vast yellow sand full of wrinkles, metal armors, and some broken clothes covered the skeletons. Those skeletons had been half buried in the sand. The exposed metal armors and those sharp metal weapons glittered under the light of Yangguang. It was a strange scene. Not to mention how the desert reacted after the tragic situation of the Jinjiawi spread. On the other side, Xiaoxian, who was in the sea, finally stopped after falling. Xiaoxian thought that he was at the bottom of this place, but in the vision of his special ability, he found that this was not the case. The place under his feet was like the top of a mountain at the bottom of the sea. If he went down on both sides, he could go deeper into the sea. As for what the deeper part looked like, Xiaoxian did not have the ability or time to see it. The place under his feet was the source of the force that pulled Xiaoxian down. Looking around, Xiaoxian found that although the place was not flat, it was still quite wide. He had been under the sea for a long time. If he went on like this, he would suffocate to death. So Xiaoxian thought that he would save up his strength and swim up in one go. The sea behemoth above had left. Probably because of the appearance of the behemoth just now, there were no other fish around. Now there should not be any other dangerous underwater creatures in a short time. Xiaoxian thought. This was an opportunity to rush out. However, Xiaoxian had saved up his strength. Just as he was about to swim upstream, the surrounding water suddenly changed. Unlike the way the behemoth flowed, it was a large-scale flow of seawater, as if to form a whirlpool. The seawater changed very quickly. In such a short time, Xiaoxian could not escape at all. He could only follow his instincts and lie down, holding tightly to the uneven stone ground under his feet. A whirlpool was indeed forming around him, but it was not the kind of whirlpool seen on the surface of the sea. It was formed vertically, and the center of the whirlpool was exactly where Xiaoxian was. The rotating water flow indicated that the stone ground was not completely in contact with the bottom of the sea. The rotating water flow could flow from below. There seemed to be a suction force around him, sucking away Xiaoxian's body temperature and making it as cold as the seawater. Feeling his body gradually lose consciousness, Xiaoxian had to mobilize his totemic power. The power that poured into every part of his body brought his lowered body temperature back to normal. When his body temperature returned to normal, it also increased Xiaoxian's perception. On land, if he casually mobilized his totemic power in the forest, he would be detected by the dire beasts. Therefore, if he wanted to hide and avoid the dire beasts, he would not easily mobilize his totemic power to the peak, unless it was the moment before a battle. Here, Xiaoxian was originally on guard against the dire beasts that sensed the totemic power and thought that their territory was being invaded. But gradually, Xiaoxian found that there were no dire beasts around. There was not even a small fish. The tearing force around him was getting stronger and stronger, and it was still rising rapidly. Xiaoxian felt that the wounds on his body that had already formed scabs had split open again. Blood splashed out from the wounds and into the sea. His whole body was under a huge tearing force. Xiaoxian felt that his bones were about to be dislocated. He could even hear the creaking sound of his bones, like wood shaking in a storm. Chapter 352. Gritting his teeth, Xiaoxian endured the dizziness caused by the lack of oxygen, as well as the pain of his bones breaking. All he could do was to hold on tightly to the uneven stone surface. He knew that if he let go, he would be pulled out by the force and become part of the whirlpool along with the seawater. If that was the case, there would be no chance of survival. It was as if a huge invisible net had formed around him, and any creature that touched this net would be caught. Under the strong tearing force around him, Xiao Xian had no time to treat the open wound. He could only mobilize his totemic power to close the wound as much as possible to reduce the bleeding. If he did not have the physical strength of a senior totemic warrior, if he did not have enough strength to replenish his strength, if he did not hold on to the stone surface with enough strength, Xiao Xian would not have been able to bear it. Finally, just as Xiao Xian was about to lose consciousness, everything calmed down again. Xiao Xian only felt that his body was lighter. The pressure of the seawater disappeared, and the tearing force around him disappeared without a trace. It was as if it had never existed, and it had suddenly disappeared. His trembling bones slowly calmed down, and his tense muscles also relaxed. It was not that Xiao Xian had let down his guard, but that he had no more strength left. He had already reached his limit by holding on until now. The sudden change had ended, and it seemed that he was temporarily safe. This made Xiao Xian let out a long sigh of relief. Breathe. Breathe again. It was smooth. There was air. Xiao Xian opened his eyes and looked around. At this moment, Xiao Xian mistakenly thought that he had come to another world, a world without seawater. However, after carefully observing his surroundings, Xiao Xian found that he was still holding on to the stone, and not far behind him was still the cliff at the bottom of the sea. The difference was that at this time, the seawater in this place was almost all gone. His clothes, hair, and the few seaweeds on the stone surface were all dried up as if they had been drained of water. On the stone surface, the seaweeds that had been drained of water cracked and broke into pieces when touched. Xiao Xian felt that he was also dehydrated. He drank all the remaining water in the kettle, but it could not replenish the water in his body. It was just an emergency. A huge hole formed around him. Outside this hole, the seawater was still flowing in a vertical circle, but it no longer affected the stone surface. It was very dark. This place was some distance from the surface of the sea, and there was very little light that could penetrate. Fortunately, Xiao Xian had a special ability to see. Sitting on the stone surface, Xiao Xian thought what to do next. The feeling of lack of oxygen was weakened. Of oxygen, of course, it was better than suffocation. A death. After calming down, his physical strength gradually recovered, and his mind gradually became clearer. He wanted to go out, but he did not know when this would. Should he stay here and wait, or should he walk along the long stone path in the hollow? Not divination. There was no rope on his body. Should he use cloth? This time, Xiao Xian did not intend to rely on the divination method that he did not know if it would succeed. Instead, he followed the shaman's words. When faced with difficulties, seek answers from the totem flame. When in darkness, the fire will light up the path ahead. It was just like when he was trapped in the king stoneworm's cave. Closing his eyes, Xiao Xian felt the totem flame in his mind and carefully observed the movement of the flame. At this moment, his will almost merged with the flame. The flame jumped and floated to one side. Once, twice, thrice, after confirming that the movement of the flame was not accidental, Xiao Xian opened his eyes and looked ahead. In front of him was the direction of the flame. It was also a path that he could not see the end of and could not guess the future. Looking at the whirlpool of seawater around him, Xiao Xian took a deep breath and lifted his feet. Hesitation would only waste time. Since he had made a decision, he naturally had to act quickly. Xiao Xian did not know how long this hole would last, or if it would disappear halfway. But since the fire had made this choice, he would try. In fact, even without using the fire, he had the intuition to move forward. Indeed, it should be safest to stay here and wait for the change to disappear, and then return to the surface. But Xiao Xian still intended to follow his intuition and the fire's choice. Even if this was a path of no return, he would continue. The surroundings were very quiet, as if all the sounds of the outside world had been blocked. Only the sound of Xiao Xian's footsteps could be heard. It was empty, as if Xiao Xian was the only person left in the world. When he was hungry, Xiao Xian scraped the dried seaweed from the stone ground to eat. It was very rare to see seaweed that could still cling to the stone ground under such a strong tearing force. It did not taste good, but it did not take much to replenish Xiao Xian's strength, so he would not starve to death. Xiao Xian also discovered that even though the seaweed had been drained of water, its roots that were deeply embedded in the stone ground were still intact. If everything returned to its original state and seawater covered this place again, it might continue to grow normally. It was really a strong plant that could survive in extreme environments. The further he went, the darker the hole became. At first, Xiao Xian could still feel an extremely dim light coming from above, but as he walked, that dim light disappeared. Xiao Xian did not know how long he had been walking in this dark hole, nor did he know how long he had been eating the dried seaweed. Every day, except for the time spent resting and eating, he had been running forward, fearing that the hole would return to its original state in the next moment and he would be buried in the sea. This sense of pressure had been urging Xiao Xian to run faster. He also had a water source. He carried the rain stone given by Yang Sui, which could condense water. This hole was only drained of water in a short period of time, but after the hole was formed, the water on the rain stone could still form normally. Moreover, he did not know if it was because he was at the bottom of the sea and was surrounded by water, but the speed of condensing water in this stone was much faster than in the desert. Xiao Xian was very lucky to have this stone with him, otherwise he would have died of thirst. When Xiao Xian's taste buds were not sensitive to the seaweed, there seemed to be some dim light around him. Xiao Xian did not know if this was a short period of time, or if he was approaching the end. When he saw a mountain wall, he was sure that he had reached the end. The hole ended here, and the stone ground was close to the mountain wall. However, the surroundings were still the same. Xiao Xian had no choice but to continue waiting for the sea to return to its original state. Every day, he still maintained the same state as when he was on the road, eating, drinking, running, and exercising to maintain the best physical strength and state to face the powerful tearing changes that might happen next. After a while, the movement of the sea finally changed. The air was pulled away in the blink of an eye, and the surrounding water vapor gradually thickened, and the powerful tearing force reappeared. Holding his breath, Xiao Xian, who was ready, calmly hugged the stone ground. When everything was over, Xiao Xian swam desperately upward. Splash! His head emerged from the sea and breathed in the air with the smell of the sea. Because he used his special vision ability most of the time in the sea, it did not take long for him to adapt to the bright world. Opening his eyes, the dazzling Yangguang made Xiao Xian fall into a trance for a moment. He even felt that he did not know what year it was. In front of him, it was not a high cliff, but a piece of land. Some columnar cacti grew on the land, and some animals that looked very similar to camels stood up and bit off the flowers from the columnar cacti. A camel chewed on a cactus flower and looked at the sea. When it saw the people on the sea, it flicked its long ears twice. Chapter 353. Xiao Xian swam from the sea to the shore. There were no other creatures in the sea because of the changes in the sea below, but once the changes were over, more sea creatures would appear here. Xiao Xian didn't dare to take the risk. After going ashore, Xiao Xian finally had a feeling of being on solid ground. When he was in the sea, although he was stepping on the stone ground, because he was still in the sea, surrounded by seawater, he didn't have the feeling of being on land. He had to constantly worry about the hole disappearing at any time. His heart was always hanging, and his nerves never relaxed. He was really physically and mentally exhausted. Taking a deep breath, feeling the dry sand around him and the wind mixed with the smell of the sea, Xiao Xian had a feeling of being alive again. This feeling made him want to release his voice and roar a few times. However, in such a strange place, making a sound may cause some unnecessary trouble. Therefore, Xiao Xian could only hold back. Not far from a slightly higher place, a few camel beasts were chewing cactus flowers with a look of contempt. They raised their heads slightly, but their line of sight was lower in the terrain, where Xiao Xian was located. Some of them had seen humans before, but they had never seen anyone appear in this place near the sea. They had never seen anyone here since they were born. Therefore, the appearance of Xiao Xian surprised them. However, even if this species was surprised, the expression on their faces was still the same, a despicable look. The surrounding ground was very dry. Although it was close to the sea, the scorching temperature from the surrounding sand and stone ground, as well as the sparse and withered unknown plants around, told Xiao Xian that it probably hadn't rained here for a while. Unlike the desert at the other end of the sea, this was not pure sand. It was just that because of the drought and long-term weathering, there were more fine sand and stones. In other words, it was more like a mountain, just close to the sea and not so high. Perhaps a long, long time ago, the sea level was not as high as it was now, and the long stone belt connecting the two ends of the sea under the sea was exposed to the water. In the stone room where the notes were stored in Snowfield City, the blind old slave had said that the slave owners came from the sea. They might have passed through the narrow stone zone from here. Xiao Xian thought of the feeling he had when he was at the bottom of the sea, and the thought of the fire seed when he made his choice. Could it be that some people from the Yanjiao tribe who had disappeared for a long time also came to this land from the other side of the sea through that narrow and long rocky area? Xiao Xian didn't feel the existence of the fire seed, so he wasn't sure if the Yanjiao tribe really existed on this continent. However, he wasn't discouraged. Nearly 1,000 years had passed, and anything could happen. Just as Shu had said, there was a crisis in the tribe, and that part of the Yanjiao tribesmen had disappeared because they were looking for a solution. Thinking up to this point, Xiao Xian was suddenly filled with anticipation. After shaking off the water on his body, Xiao Xian drank some of the water he collected from the animal skin bag. His water bottle had broken when he was at the bottom of the sea, so he could only use the animal skin bag with rain stones as a water bag. The skin of the fierce beast was strong enough. Although the bag had been used to store other things in order to survive, he didn't care too much. It was a good time to relax. Without the pressure of the sea, every cell in his body seemed to have a carefree atmosphere. His physical strength was rapidly recovering, and Xiao Xian swung his arms and walked along the sand and stones. He didn't go far immediately. For the time being, he didn't detect the existence of other threatening beasts, but if he walked for a while on land, it might not be the case. What he needed now was to quickly replenish his physical strength, not to find a beast to duel. Speaking of which, after being a vegetarian for so long, as a Yanjiao who had always been a carnivore, Xiao Xian felt his teeth itch. Looking at the several camel beasts that were looking at him from a higher place, Xiao Xian couldn't help but imagine them all as roasted whole camels. Xiao Xian still wanted to wait until his physical strength was fully recovered before dealing with the camel beasts. Unexpectedly, the other party was quite alert. It seemed to be aware of Xiao Xian's intention. It raised its head and turned its neck, turned around, and left. It didn't give Xiao Xian any extra glances. Xiao Xian. Seeing the camel beasts leave, Xiao Xian didn't chase after them. Instead, he waited until his physical strength was almost recovered and he had enough ability to protect himself before moving. It was really dry here. As he walked forward, the surrounding plants were mostly column-shaped cacti. Some of the flowers on the cacti pillars were eaten by the camel beasts just now. Even though they were animals that were good at living in dry areas, they still needed to replenish their water supply. If they didn't see any fresh water and didn't want to lick the seawater, they could only nibble on the flowers. The flowers on the cacti could provide them with the water they needed to survive temporarily. As he walked forward, there were more and more column-shaped cacti around him. They were also much taller. Even if there were flowers on the cacti, the camel beasts wouldn't be able to eat them. The surroundings were very dry, and there were obvious cracks in many places on the ground. The surrounding heat waves seemed to want to drain all the water from the ground, constantly scraping. However, it didn't take long for Xiao Xian to feel the changes in his surroundings. The wind blowing from the sea was cool, completely different from the heat waves on the ground. The changes in the surroundings cooled the warm and humid air flow over the land, and soon formed a white fog. Standing at a high place, Xiao Xian could see some white fog clouds near the coast. The wind from the sea blew the white fog towards the land. It was as if there was fog around him, and soon more and more white fog shrouded him. When Xiao Xian breathed, he could feel the obvious increase in the water vapor in the air. On the plants growing around him, water droplets condensed from the fog gradually appeared on the branches and leaves. On the cactus pillars, water droplets gradually condensed on the slender thorns, growing from small to large, sparkling and translucent. Xiao Xian even saw plants like lichens attached to some cacti. When the fog appeared, they would absorb the water vapor in the white fog like a sponge. The fact that such plants could survive meant that white fog often appeared in this place. It was no wonder that although the surroundings were dry, there were still some plants, unlike the barren desert on the other side of the sea. There were more and more animals moving around, and the water allowed life to continue. Living in such a place, every animal knew how to use the natural environment to survive better. Small flying birds came over one after another, landing from the air and resting on the cactus pillars, drinking the dew condensed on the cactus thorns. In a place where there was little rain but a lot of fog, the dew brought by the fog was almost a life-saving resource for all the animals living around. Because there were many animals moving around, Xiao Xian was on guard, but found that there were mostly small animals here, and most of them were not a threat to him. As for large beasts, Xiao Xian hadn't seen them yet. Xiao Xian also collected some dew. He couldn't always rely on the rain stone. In the sea, the rain stone's ability to condense water was very strong, but on the shore, the surrounding was still dry, so the efficiency was low. So, when there was an opportunity to collect water, Xiao Xian naturally wouldn't let it go. Chapter 354. The further they went, the less dense the fog around them. However, it was still there. Unlike the places he had been to before, there were fewer small beasts active here, and the atmosphere was not as harmless as before. It was full of quiet tension. Xiao Xian tied up the animal skin bag and held the only short knife in his hand. He stepped lightly and cautiously forward. At this moment, Xiao Xian heard voices. He had not seen anyone for a long time, and now he finally heard people's voices. Although he was vigilant, Xiao Xian's heart relaxed a lot. It was good that there were people. He was afraid that this was just an uninhabited land. With a change of direction, Xiao Xian went in the direction of the voices. The fog there was thicker. Listening carefully, there were two people's voices. Moreover, Xiao Xian could understand what they were saying. The language here was more inclined to the language used by the slave owners. This also proved that the slave owners back then might have really passed through here. Once again proving a guess, Xiao Xian was in a better mood. The two people seemed to be collecting dew, as well as some plants that absorbed the dew. Is this enough? A young woman dressed in coarse cloth looked at the basket she was carrying and asked the person next to her. The young man standing next to her, vigilantly looking around, quickly glanced at the basket, shook his head and said, "Look for more. It hasn't rained for a long time. If it continues like this, it will be difficult." "That's true. Then look for more. Be careful of your surroundings." "I know. Be careful. Back off." The young man took 2 steps forward, blocking the woman behind him. He held a long, strange-looking knife in his hand and looked not far away. Not far from them, some sand and stones were moving slowly, making a subtle rustling sound. Below, something was squirming. But soon, the movement suddenly became louder. The other party seemed to know that they had been discovered and no longer hid. A long line protruded from the ground, and with a puff like a spray of water vapor, the sand and stones on the ground rolled up, and the protruding line formed a long dragon. A dark brown giant insect that was more than 3 meters wide and 10 meters long rushed out from the ground. It had many legs, and its body was segmented and covered with hard plates like armor. It quickly came towards the two people. The young man's body suddenly erupted with an aura, and with this aura, some earth-colored lines appeared on his body. This was a totem warrior. The giant worm stood up like a snake and attacked the two of them. It seemed to have noticed that the man was more difficult to deal with. After 2 unsuccessful attacks, it changed its target and went around the young man. It bared its fangs and attacked the woman who was holding the basket tightly. Although the young woman was a little weaker in terms of combat power, she was also good at running away. If she didn't have the ability to run for her life, it would be impossible for her to survive here. However, under the giant insect's attack, she was very embarrassed. There was a lot of fog around, and the ground was not flat, which reduced her speed. If she slipped, her speed would be greatly reduced, and it would affect her escape. Seeing that the giant insect had changed its target, the young man was anxious. He ran over, trying to stop the giant insect before it attacked. Even if he couldn't stop it, he had to attract the attention of the giant insect. Just when the two people were anxious, there was a bang. The giant insect that was about to attack the young woman was suddenly hit by a big stone. Probably not expecting to be attacked like this, the giant insect was stunned and didn't know what was going on. Before it could recover, another rock came crashing down. This time, the force was stronger, fiercer, and more accurate. It directly hit its 2 open fangs, causing it to almost fall over. When the giant insect stabilized, crack! A tooth fell from the giant insect's mouth. The other tooth of the giant insect wasn't so bad, but it was still hurt. Even if its body was hard, it couldn't withstand one big stone after another, not to mention that it lost a tooth. How could it continue like this? There was no sound, but the giant insect's actions showed that it was angry. No one would be able to remain calm if a tooth was smashed off while hunting. Abandoning its original prey, the giant insect turned to look for the source of the stone. It had already sensed the location of the person who threw the stone. The vision of the average person was limited in this kind of fog, but the giant insect was different. It could even accurately find prey within a few hundred meters in the thicker fog. The furious giant insect rushed in the direction of Xiao Xian. Originally, it thought that the little guy who threw the stone would definitely run away when he saw it coming, so it would have to spend some effort to chase him. However, the reality was completely different. The person who threw the stone not only didn't run away, but also rushed straight in its direction. Looking at the momentum of the rush, it was not afraid at all. Xiao Xian hadn't hunted for a long time. He had been repeating the boring activities at the bottom of the sea: eating, drinking, sleeping, running. As a Yanjiao, he probably yearned for the exciting hunting life in the mountains. After coming ashore, his hands began to itch. When he saw the group of camel beasts, he almost made a move. If it wasn't for the fact that he needed to recover his strength, he would have done it long ago. Now that he saw the scene in front of him, of course he had to make a move. The totemic power in his body exploded. At this moment, Xiao Xian could even hear the powerful beating of his heart, like the beating of war drums before a battle, encouraging him. His blood was surging, and every part of his body was filled with a sense of impatience. How long had it been since he felt this way? After a long silence, Xiao Xian once again found the carefree and hot-blooded feeling he had when he was hunting in the mountains with the same tribesmen. His strength, unwilling to be silent, became fierce like the waves of the sea, as if it was going to sweep everything away. Every step he took on the ground made a roaring sound, like a heavy beast's paw slapping the ground. Compared to the two people before, Xiao Xian at this moment was more like a fierce beast living in the mountains. It was refreshing to stretch out with full strength, then retract, then suddenly explode in the next moment. Just as the giant worm stood up and was about to attack, Xiao Xian stomped on the ground. The sand and stones under his feet exploded, and the air was blown into the air by this stomp. Much of the fog was dispersed. The tyrannical force propelled his body forward, and Xiao Xian rushed towards the giant worm like a cannonball. He broke through the fog and kicked the giant worm's throat. That was where the giant worm's fangs and two long forelimbs could not reach. The giant worm had actually felt Xiao Xian's aura before it attacked, and hesitated. But it was too late to do anything now. Retreat? There was no way to retreat. Even if it felt that something was wrong, what could it do? Xiao Xian's kick was faster than the giant worm's, and it had no time to react. Bang! The sound of the collision was like a huge hammer hitting a mountain rock, and it sounded in this world shrouded in white fog. Taking advantage of the giant worm's change of target, the young man from before took the girl a little further away. Then he turned back to look at the giant worm. At first, he was still thinking about who had come to help them, so that he could immediately return to fight with the other party. However, when he turned his head, he saw the clear body of the worm flying out of the fog with a loud bang that made their hearts skip a beat. Flying, the eyelids of the two young men twitched at the same time, and they even had the urge to rub their eyes to see if it was an illusion brought on by the fog. After landing, the long body of the worm rolled a few times on the sand and stones, knocking down a few cacti. There were sounds of hard chunks falling around them, and one of them fell by the young man's feet. He looked at it and saw that it was the shell of the giant worm's scales that had fallen off. There was still some worm skin stuck on the inside of the shell, and the shell was used to protect the worm's body like armor, but a few pieces had been kicked off. This. The young man swallowed his saliva. Who the hell is this? Holding the saber in his hand, the young man thought to himself, even if I used the saber in my hand to chop it, it would be difficult to even leave a deep mark on the shell, let alone break the shell. The other party actually managed to kick the shell off. Hiss, from the looks of it, the worm's belly was kicked upside down. After being kicked, the giant worm that was rolling on the ground felt that Xiao Xian's momentum was still rising. Seeing that Xiao Xian didn't seem to be satisfied with the kick and wanted to do it again, it didn't care about the pain and quickly crawled into the ground. For a short time, it couldn't eat because of its throat injury, and the other injuries on its body also needed time to heal. In any case, it didn't plan to come out for a while. No, it would even leave this place and avoid it. When the giant worm left, the two young men who came out to collect dew nervously looked at the figure in the fog walking towards them. Although they were very grateful for the other party's rescue, they couldn't remain calm after seeing the scene just now. They were so nervous that their foreheads were sweating. They wanted to say something, but their throats seemed to be stuck. They opened their mouths a few times but couldn't make a sound. They didn't know what kind of tone to use and what kind of words to say. If they angered the other party, would the two of them also be kicked? Xiao Xian slowly walked in the direction of the two men. He had just finished the battle, and the power in his body hadn't calmed down. He was still lingering and didn't seem to be satisfied. The air on the surface of his body vibrated, and even the fog around Xiao Xian's body was dispelled. Running at the bottom of the sea for such a long time was tough and uncomfortable. Both physical and mental pressure had impacted Xiao Xian's body, but he did not weaken. On the contrary, it was as if his body had been tempered and became stronger. The leg that kicked the giant worm was slightly numb, but it wasn't uncomfortable or injured. When he rushed out, he seemed to already know that the kick wouldn't hurt him. When Xiao Xian came closer, the two men finally saw Xiao Xian's appearance clearly. Because he hadn't changed his clothes for a long time, Xiao Xian's cloth clothes had already become rags, revealing his body. The smooth lines of his muscles were like the hardest stone that had been polished. If they hadn't seen the scene with their own eyes, they wouldn't have been able to imagine how terrifying the power contained in this person's body was. The two men looked at the appearance of the person who had kicked the giant worm. He was quite young, and the other party looked at them with a kind and amiable gaze. He didn't give off a fierce feeling. From appearance alone, the two men really couldn't imagine that this person had such ability. Chapter 355. Seeing that the other two had been silent, Xiao Xian took the lead to break the silence. "Hello." Xiao Xian smiled at the two in a friendly manner. The barbaric and ferocious momentum of kicking the giant insect had disappeared without a trace. With Xiao Xian's words, the atmosphere eased a lot, and the tension of the young man and woman suddenly relaxed. "Hello. Hello." Although the atmosphere eased, the young man still stuttered when he opened his mouth. He was still nervous facing Xiao Xian, but thinking that Xiao Xian had just helped them, he also showed a smile. "Thank you for just now. We are from the Maka tribe. My name is Wanfu, and her name is Shuerue." According to Wanfu's introduction, the two of them were husband and wife. They were married not long ago. The tribe was some distance from here, but not too far. After all, there were not many tribes in this remote and arid place. Their Maka tribe was already the closest to here. Because it had not rained for a long time, the two did not store water at home. Their family had difficulty living, so they came here to look for opportunities. They did not know when the fog would appear, but in order to wait for the fog to come, in order to collect water, they were willing to continue to wait. Fortunately, their luck was good this time. In less than 2 days, they encountered the fog. They came to a place where the fog was thicker to collect some moist edible plants, and also collected some water to bring back. "By the way, which tribe are you from?" After introducing themselves, Wanfu asked Xiao Xian. "My name is Xiao Xian. As for my tribe, I don't know where it is located on this land, because I was born and raised outside and have never seen a tribe. My parents and ancestors were born and raised outside." Xiao Xian was right. He was indeed born in a place outside this land. If there was another part of the Yanjiao people on this land, he did not know where the tribe was and had never seen anyone else. Hearing Xiao Xian say so, the expression of the two people looking at Xiao Xian suddenly changed, summed up in one word: pitiful. Xiao Xian. At first, Xiao Xian was still wondering how much of this lame story would convince the two of them. If he said this on the other side of the sea, people who heard this would definitely think that it was nonsense. Living outside and never seeing other people in the tribe, weren't they just wanderers? How could wanderers be so powerful? How could a wanderer suddenly become a senior totem warrior? It was better to find a better excuse. However, in this place, the two young men really believed Xiao Xian's words and did not doubt him at all. Xiao Xian couldn't help but feel puzzled. The two of them weren't stupid. At the very least, they were still on guard. However, they didn't doubt Xiao Xian's words. In other words, the situation here might be different from that on the other side of the sea. When Xiao Xian looked at the totem patterns on the young warrior's body, he noticed that the totem patterns on the young warrior's body were brighter. Even though they were only the grayish-yellow color of sand, they didn't appear dull. Instead, they gave off a sense of vitality. This was different from the totem patterns on the vast majority of totem warriors that Xiao Xian had seen before. In the Yanjiao tribe, except for Xiao Xian, when other people used their totem power, the totem patterns on their bodies were also dark. There were many strange places. Have you heard of Yanjiao? Xiao Xian carefully observed the reaction of the two. This was a new place. If there were Yanjiao people here, he didn't know what kind of attitude other people would have towards the Yanjiao tribe. When Xiao Xian went from the other side of the river to the other side to look for the old land, he had always been high profile and didn't hide anything. Because he was high profile, the shaman let him spread the name of Yanjiao. Xiao Xian naturally wouldn't restrain himself. But here, Xiao Xian had to be cautious. There were too many strange places. Wanfu and Shuri were still a little confused about the word Yanjiao. The word was unfamiliar to them. Is Yanjiao the tribe of your ancestors? Or is it something else? Wanfu asked. Seeing that the reaction of the two people was not defensive and hostile, Xiao Xian nodded and said, yes. Thinking about it, Wanfu scratched his head and apologized to Xiao Xian. I seem to have heard of it, but I can't remember. Then forget it, I'll look for it later. Xiao Xian was slightly disappointed. Wanfu and Shuri saw Xiao Xian like this, and their hearts once again lamented. Poor man. For this young man who had helped her and had a poor life, Shuri couldn't help but sympathize, pulling the corner of Wanfu's clothes. Wanfu knew what Shuri meant, and he himself had the same idea, so he said to Xiao Xian, do you have any arrangements now? Why don't we go back to the Maka tribe together? We also want to thank you. Xiao Xian thought for a moment. Well, then I'll bother you. He really needed a place to get to know this strange continent well, inquire more information, and get a complete set of clothes to wear. With Xiao Xian following, Wanfu and Shuri were much more relaxed. Knowing that Xiao Xian was strong, they were not too worried. There were not many threatening giant beasts here. Most of the time, they could solve it by themselves. Otherwise, they would not dare to come here with just two people. Encountering a giant insect was just bad luck. After chatting a lot with Xiao Xian, Wanfu also let go of some things and said a lot. We came out with the rest of the tribe. When we came here, we split up, and then we'll meet again in another place. There's no other way. It hasn't rained for a long time, and the spring water on the mountain has been cut off. Everyone's life is difficult, unless we go farther to find water. We don't want to go farther, so we came here to try our luck. Xiao Xian watched them squeeze the water absorbed by the lichen into the clay pot. They did not let go of the lichen. After squeezing the water, they threw it into the basket and brought it back. This lichen was edible. Following Wanfu and Shuri, Xiao Xian also learned some survival methods here, what things could be eaten and what things could not be touched. If it rains, we don't have to run so far to find dew. Wanfu said with emotion. Although his mouth was full of emotion, he did not complain much. Living in such a dry place, he had long been accustomed to it. In his memory, there were longer dry periods, but they all survived. The methods were found by oneself. Only people who did not want to do anything and did not want to do anything would die of thirst. Seeing the appearance of Wanfu and Shuri, Xiao Xian glanced at the vines wrapped around a tree that was not thick. Some branches of the vines had withered because of the drought a few days ago. Xiao Xian casually tore off a piece, and his hands began to move. Wanfu, who was collecting dew and talking to himself, did not notice Xiao Xian's movements. After a short while, Xiao Xian finished the knot, looked at the conclusion, tore the knot and threw it away. 10 days later, at noon, it should be able to rain. Xiao Xian said. Wanfu and Shuri's movements of collecting water paused because of this sentence, and they both looked at Xiao Xian in surprise. You know how to read the weather? A little. Xiao Xian did not say much. Wanfu and Shuri looked at each other, not knowing whether to believe Xiao Xian's words or not. However, no matter what, they still had to collect dew now. Even if it rained 10 days later, they still needed to get through these 10 days. After the jars and baskets were full, the two left and went to the place where they agreed to meet with the tribes. The further they went, the thinner the fog became, and the air became hotter. When they felt the scorching heat again, the surroundings were still dry and barren, far less vibrant than the fog-shrouded place. When they went to the meeting place, Wanfu hunted a beast, and Xiao Xian also hunted too. Although they were not as good as the giant worm, they had more meat. Even if the giant worm was a vicious beast, it did not have much meat and could not eat much. Xiao Xian, who has been a vegetarian for a long time, did not care about being picky. Of the two beasts, one was for Xiao Xian to eat himself, and the other was for Wanfu after he went to the Maka tribe. He planned to stay in the Maka tribe for a while, so naturally, he had to bring some gifts. He could not rely on the credit of saving people. When the sun was slanting, Xiao Xian also saw the other people of the Maka tribe who came out with the Wanfu couple. Several of them were injured, but fortunately no one died. This was already a very good situation. Wanfu introduced Xiao Xian to them. Originally, when they saw Xiao Xian's rags, they still had some disgust. When they caught a glimpse of the two beasts that Xiao Xian hunted, their faces eased a lot. Some of them also hunted some beasts, but they were not as good as Xiao Xian's, and the quantity was not as good. When they returned to the Maka tribe, the others saw Xiao Xian carrying two beasts and chatting with Wanfu easily. He was not even out of breath, and they could not help but be surprised. However, the Wanfu couple also said that after seeing Xiao Xian throw a stone at the giant worm and kick the giant worm, they were not surprised. Chapter 356. For the strong, everyone was always in awe. They gradually restrained their slightly disgusted look because of Xiao Xian's ragged clothes. When the sun was close to the horizon, Xiao Xian finally saw the place where the Maka tribe was located. The stone wall separated the Maka tribe from the outside. Looking from a high place, one could see the stone houses inside. Although they were not high, they were still orderly. Some houses also specially surrounded the yard with stones. For Wanfu to bring back a stranger, the people of the Maka tribe did not intend to pay attention. But Xiao Xian's ragged clothes and the two beasts he was carrying were too contradictory. The people who saw this scene could not help but take a few more glances. Who was this person? Really strange. Xiao Xian already knew on the way here that many of the tribes here were no longer bound by totems. They also had things of faith, but most of them were spiritual sustenance, not the main source of power. If a stranger was accepted by a family, as long as he did not do anything that hindered the tribe, he could be accepted by the tribe and become a member of it. The closer he got to the Maka tribe, the deeper the doubts in Xiao Xian's heart. He did not feel the existence of the fire seed in the Maka tribe. Asking about the fire pit, Xiao Xian knew that in the Maka tribe there was a fire pit. Perhaps it was a custom passed down by the ancestors, and it would be used during the sacrifice. However, unlike the tribes that Xiao Xian knew before, there was no fire seed in their fire pit. Not only the Maka tribe, Wanfu told Xiao Xian that other tribes were also like this. As for the fire seed, the ancestors would only mention it when they told stories to the younger generation. However, no one could say clearly how the fire seed disappeared. Many of them were glossed over because they were not clear. It was too long ago, and they had no way to know. Living with Wanfu were two old people and his elder brother's family. Wanfu's elder brother, Wanfa, did not go with them to collect dew. Instead, he went with another team to look for water in another direction, but he only brought back some dried fruits. It was not a fruitless return. Xiao Xian temporarily lived in the Maka tribe. He also told Wanfu that he was only staying temporarily and would leave in a few days. Wanfa didn't have a good temper like his younger brother. When he saw Xiao Xian, he glanced at Xiao Xian with a picky and defensive look, as if he was looking at someone with bad intentions. Even when Xiao Xian brought two wild beasts, his attitude did not change. Xiao Xian's rags had already caused Wanfa to despise him. Seeing that Xiao Xian was actually using a stone knife, Wanfa despised him even more. This person was actually using a stone knife. It was no wonder that he only had rags that he had been wearing for who knew how long. Stone knives were only used by his grandfather's 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 grandfather. In their tribe, those who were slightly capable had metal knives. In the eyes of Wanfa and the others, Xiao Xian was just a poor guy with great strength. Wanfa waved his slightly deformed and scratched short sword in front of Xiao Xian, as if he was showing off. Not only the Wanfu brothers, but most of the people of the Maka tribe had metal weapons on hand, or they were composite weapons. Weapons made of wood and animal horns combined with metal. As for pure stone weapons, except for some old people, the young warriors did not use them. Of course, there were also people who thought they were smart. They saw that Xiao Xian's stone knife was extraordinary. Under the guise of looking at you, I'll help you. They wanted to use their rusty knife to exchange for Xiao Xian's stone knife. Xiao Xian certainly did not exchange. He just calmly looked at the other party. Seeing that the other party was uncomfortable, he took the initiative to give up and leave. Even if Xiao Xian's eyes were calm, the people who faced Xiao Xian had a feeling of breathlessness. It was as if there was a big hand covering the top of their head, and it could come down at any time. Wanfu's attitude had always been very good. He took out a set of his old clothes, let Shuri change it a little, and gave it to Xiao Xian to wear. They did not have new cloth, and of course there were no new clothes. Xiao Xian did not care about wearing old clothes. It was better than wearing rags. Xiao Xian's appetite was big. He hunted 2 beasts. One was given to Wanfu's family, and the other was eaten by himself. He only cared about it for 1 day. The next day, he went out to hunt again and brought back one. Every day, he would go out to hunt, eat it himself, and give some to Wanfu's family. Because of Xiao Xian's frequent movements, some people who originally disliked Xiao Xian began to have careful thoughts. Especially the young girls of the Maka tribe, the frequency of walking to Wanfu's door increased a lot. Some people dressed up every day to deliberately block Xiao Xian, in order to say a few more words. If they found such a hunter, they would not have to worry about starvation for the rest of their lives. Seeing that Xiao Xian's popularity was rising, the young people of the Maka tribe provoked Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian adopted a strategy of ignoring most of the time, and if he could not avoid it, he would end it quickly. There were not many senior totem warriors in this tribe. Most of the young people were intermediate totem warriors like Wanfu. Xiao Xian was not interested in bullying these people. After understanding Xiao Xian's strength, the number of people who challenged him gradually decreased. Instead, there were several high-level members of the Maka tribe. For those who had the ability, they were certainly willing to retain them. Knowing that Xiao Xian was only staying temporarily, they repeatedly sent people to persuade Xiao Xian to stay and also promise some benefits. Unfortunately, they could not make Xiao Xian change his mind. For this reason, they regretted for several days. Because of Xiao Xian's temporary residence, the living conditions of Wanfu's family were obviously improved by a grade. The elderly and children in the family also seemed to be more energetic, but the problem of water was still difficult to solve. Xiao Xian could not help them. The efficiency of the rainstones in his hands was not high in dry places. However, the water that Wanfu and the others collected last time can last for 10 days if they save a little. After 10 days, everything would be fine. Seeing that Xiao Xian was distributing meat every day, Wanfu, who originally wanted to repay the kindness, did not expect that the kindness was not much. Instead, he received a lot of benefits from the other party. There was not much that he could help Xiao Xian, and his heart was even more guilty. He could only pull out what he knew when Xiao Xian asked something, and ask others if he did not know. This helped Xiao Xian a lot. On this day, Xiao Xian had lived in the Maka tribe for 10 days. He had a preliminary understanding of this place, and did not intend to continue to live here. Walking to the door of the house, Xiao Xian looked up at the sky. "Hey, Xiao Xian, you don't go out today?" Wanfu, who had just woken up, saw that Xiao Xian did not go out, and asked in surprise. During this time, Xiao Xian went out in the morning every day and came back when the sun was tilting. Wanfu's people were already used to it. Even if they went out to hunt, they would not go out every day. Xiao Xian was a special case. Sure enough, a real warrior was different from others. Seeing Xiao Xian look up at the sky, Wanfu remembered what Xiao Xian said to them about rain 10 days ago. He went to the door and looked up at the sky. The sun was still high in the sky, and there were some floating clouds in the sky. But in this place, sometimes clouds did not mean that it would rain. Looking at the shape and shape was useless. Sometimes, looking at the dark clouds and rolling thunder, it did not take long for the sky to clear again. It was not uncommon. "I'm leaving today. Thank you for your hospitality." Xiao Xian turned and said, "Ah, you're leaving?" Shirue, who came out, was also surprised. She knew the changes in the family during this time. Now there was still a lot of meat in the family that had not been eaten and was hung outside to dry. Many people envied their family for having such a person. Unfortunately, he was leaving. Also, such a person would not be trapped in a remote place like the Maka tribe. Even if he went to the city-state or to those big tribes, he could easily stay. When Xiao Xian came, he did not bring many things, and when he left, he did not bring much. The most obvious thing was that he changed his clothes, and he did not look so embarrassed. When Xiao Xian left, he met a traveling team of Maka coming back from the outside. This team went to farther places to trade, and also helped the tribes bring back some things, such as metal weapons and new cloth. In the traveling team, there were 3 senior totem warriors, 2 middle-aged men, and 1 older. However, Xiao Xian was not afraid of them, not to mention that he was already leaving, so he did not look at this team. However, the people in the team saw Xiao Xian, a stranger, and glanced at him a few more times. Wanfu sent Xiao Xian out of the tribe, and then went back. Wanfu, who was that person just now? There were people in the traveling team who were familiar with Wanfu and asked. Oh, his name is Xiaoxian. He saved me and Shirue and lived in our house for 10 days. He is very powerful and can go out to hunt beasts every day. Wanfu talked about Xiaoxian's matter. When he met a familiar friend, Wanfu's words were more. He described the situation when Xiaoxian saved them in detail and also added some words to polish it, which could arouse the interest of the listeners. Wow, so powerful? Yes, very powerful. Wanfu nodded vigorously. Every time he said this, many people did not believe it, saying that he was too exaggerated. However, he really did not exaggerate, and what he said was the truth. Some people in the returning team also heard Wanfu's words. Like others, they felt that Wanfu's words were only 30% true, at most 50%. The young people in the tribe always exaggerated things. However, the leaders of the team thought more about it. A hale and hearty old man looked at the person next to him and said, "Why do I feel that this method of directly moving a big stone to smash a behemoth sounds a bit familiar?" Me too, I just can't remember where I heard it. The person next to the old man also said, "Such a fierce and arrogant method of fighting. I have indeed heard it. I should have heard it when I went to the city-state before." The 3 people with the highest status in the team said so, and the others did not have much to say. No matter what they thought, they would not refute the words of these 3 elders. After a moment of silence, the old man asked Wanfu, "I just saw him talk to you before he left. What was he talking about?" Wanfu looked serious. This was the father of the current leader of the tribe. His position in the tribe was very high, and he had to be treated with respect. Seeing this question, Wanfu did not hide it and seriously replied, 10 days ago, when we went out to collect, Xiaoxian said that it would rain this afternoon. Just now, he reminded me to wash the big jar full of jerky at home and wait for the water." As soon as Wanfu's voice fell, a few younger people could not help but laugh. Huh, you believe this? Who does he think he is? Is he? Here, some people like that were not collectively called witches, but different according to gender. Men were witches, women were witches, and the names were different. That's right. How did he fall into such a situation? Also born outside, don't know where the tribe is? Full of lies. Extremely bad. Someone answered. He should be beaten up and thrown out. Only you, Wanfu, would believe it. How old are you? Still so easily deceived. The young people spoke one after another, but the 3 people with the highest status in the team did not make a sound. They seemed to be contemplating. After a long while, the old man smiled casually. Probably I think too much. Okay, everyone hurry up and move the things back. Wanfu intended to defend Xiaoxian, but the leader's father had spoken, so he could only swallow the defense. But after returning, Wanfu and Shirue quickly cleaned up the pots and jars in the house. Noon gradually passed. The young people who returned to the tribe from the expedition team were bragging to their friends about what they had seen and heard on this trip, while the elders were in the house to summarize and discuss the expedition. Rumble. Thunder seemed to roll from a distance. Whether it was the young people who were bragging outside or the elders who were discussing in the house, they all stopped moving. The rest of the Maka tribe also stopped what they were doing and ran out to look at the sky. The scorching sun in the sky was quickly being blocked by the clouds. The wind was blowing fiercely, and the clouds were rapidly increasing and thickening at a speed visible to the naked eye, like an army passing through. Rumble. Thunder sounded one after another. This time, it did not look like it was just thunder and not rain, but it was really raining. Hurry up. Clear out the jars in the house. Someone shouted. Oh, my house is filled with things. Now is the time to think about other things. Quickly clear it out. What about the things in it? It's all poured out. Hurry up. The weather here was changing rapidly. No one knew how long the rain would last. If they missed it, they would definitely regret it. Dila, Dila, Dila. The bean-sized raindrops hit the ground, splashing a lot of dust. The sky was no longer clear. It was gloomy, heavy, and scary. Soon, the raindrops became dense, like a torrential downpour, as if someone was pouring water from the sky. The children screamed and played outside with their bare bodies and bare feet. The young people who were just sitting at the door and bragging to their friends looked at the sky sluggishly, murmuring, "It's really raining." The elders who were discussing in the house, especially the old man, all had the same idea. That person actually hit the nail on the head. Could it be that that person was really a Hui? especially the people who had persuaded Xiao Xian to stay. Now they felt regret. If they had known earlier, they would have made the other party stay even if they had to hug his leg. Their Maka tribe also had Hui, but there were also high and low Hui. If the Hui of their tribe went to the city, they would not dare to say that they were Hui. Their ability was too low, and they would be laughed at by the witches of the city. And the person who could predict the rain 10 days ago was, of course, more powerful. If they could make him stay. At this time, Xiao Xian was already far away from the Maka tribe. The cactus around, because of the rain, the underground roots were desperately absorbing the water that finally fell. The deep groove-like folds on the stems also swelled a lot because of the absorption of water. They were like machines that stored water, storing the water, and then preparing for the next dry day. Xiao Xian, who was walking among them, wiped the water on his face, looked at the lightning and thunder in the sky, smiled softly, and moved forward step by step. Chapter 357. After leaving the Maka tribe, Xiao Xian also saw people from other tribes going out, but he did not go with them. Those people were very wary of Xiao Xian, probably because they were carrying some goods and were worried that Xiao Xian would rob them. Xiao Xian also had the experience of a long journey. He knew that the team would reject strangers halfway, so he did not go up. He just asked at a distance of 20 meters. The other party saw that Xiao Xian did not mean to get close. After reluctantly answering Xiao Xian's 2 questions, they hurried away. Xiao Xian just asked about the geographical shape of the surrounding area, but the other party's answer was too brief. Xiao Xian could only combine the information he heard from the Maka tribe and speculate about where to go. Here there were tribes and slave masters. However, there weren't many conflicts between the tribes and the slave masters, unlike the conflicts on the other side of the sea. Many of the tribes even often went to the cities under the jurisdiction of the slave owners to trade. For them, this was a very common thing. For example, the Maka tribe often had traveling teams go to the nearest city, exchanging things for cloth, copper weapons, and so on. However, Xiao Xian did not intend to go to the slave owners' territory. What he wanted to know most now was whether the other half of the Yanjiao tribe was here or not. If the preferences of the Yanjiao people had not changed, they would probably be more inclined to the mountainous areas, especially places with many fierce beasts. With more people, there would naturally be fewer beasts and fierce beasts. Therefore, Xiao Xian intended to go to the mountainous areas with fewer people to try his luck. After asking about the surrounding geographical shape, Xiao Xian made another knot divination to determine a direction and went there. He only divined the approximate location, not the distance, so he could only go in that direction. In the beginning, he could see some people traveling every 2 days, but gradually, the number of people he saw decreased. The land became desolate, and although the surrounding mountains and forests were wide, he did not know if it was because of the soil, but the growth of plants was not lush, and there were not many thick trees. Xiao Xian looked up and saw that there were layers of slightly desolate mountains around him. He did not change his route, intending to pass through the valley. He listened carefully to the movements around him. Except for the cries of some birds and small beasts, he did not hear any other dangerous sounds. The cries of the birds and beasts were relatively peaceful, and there was no panic. It should be relatively safe here. There were occasional streams flowing through the valley. Xiao Xian had been following the predetermined route and direction. When he came to a stream, he saw someone lying by the water, with his head next to the stream. When the stream flowed, the other's face. His gray hair scattered in the water, swinging with the stream. If the other person had already died, Xiao Xian would not have cared. However, the person was still alive, just a little weak. After going over to check, Xiao Xian found that this was a rather old man. There were many wrinkles on his face, and he looked older than he looked from the back. The person did not have any serious external injuries. Other than the broken bone in his right arm, the rest of his body was fine. This person was dressed in gray cotton clothes, and it was unknown how much he had experienced. His clothes were tattered, and were only a little better than when Xiao Xian had first arrived. The weapons he carried were a few small copper knives. The knives looked different, but they were all very small. Judging from the shape, they did not look like they were used as hidden weapons. Xiao Xian did not know what they were used for. There was also a bag wrapped around his waist. The bag was made of animal skin. Judging from the leather, it was at the level of a dire beast. The skin of an ordinary beast would not be so tough. After carefully sizing up the person, Xiao Xian carefully turned him over and moved him away from the stream. Xiao Xian called out to him, but he did not wake up. Seeing that the person did not wake up, Xiao Xian's gaze fell on the animal skin bag around the person's waist. He reached out and poked it. When the other party was lying by the stream, his uninjured left arm had been protecting his body. Even when he flipped over, his arm did not leave his body. This was a subconscious action, which meant that the animal skin pouch was very important to this person. When Xiao Xian reached out and poked the animal skin bag, the person did not wake up, but the muscles on his face twitched. When he poked again, the person's eyes suddenly opened. His bloodshot eyes were filled with vigilance and murderous intent. He pushed his elbow against the ground and quickly rolled away from Xiao Xian. Then he hit his head on a big rock beside him. Xiao Xian heard the sound and felt pain for him. There was no need to be so agitated. Fortunately, the person did not faint. After groaning in pain, the person wanted to reach out and touch his injured forehead. However, his right arm was injured, and his left arm was protecting the animal skin bag. He moved his left arm, but after some thought, he put it back and continued to protect the animal skin bag. He allowed the blood to flow from his forehead, but his eyes were fixed on Xiao Xian, as if he was afraid that Xiao Xian would come over and rob him. "Don't worry, I won't rob you." Xiao Xian saw him like this and said. At such an old age, he did not know why he had fainted by the stream. When he woke up, he hit his head on a rock. It would be strange if he felt good. The person relaxed a little, but his guard was still up. "If I wanted to rob you, I would have done it a long time ago. Why would I wait until now? Besides, even if I wanted to rob you now, can you stop me?" Xiao Xian said. "That's true." The white-haired old man lowered his guard a little. The murderous aura he had when he woke up also disappeared. His head was still a little dizzy, so he calmed down and moved his nose. He looked at Xiao Xian and asked, "Do you have any meat on you?" It was a question, but his tone was very certain. Xiao Xian reached into the bag and took out a piece of jerky. He threw it over and asked, "How did you faint here?" The old man hurriedly caught the jerky that Xiao Xian threw over and sniffed it. His eyes were a little disgusted, but his movements were not slow. He quickly took a few bites and answered Xiao Xian with a lisp, "I was hungry." He had thought that it was poison or some other reason, but the answer turned out to be hunger. After quickly finishing the jerky that Xiao Xian gave him, the old man looked at Xiao Xian again and asked, "Do you have any more?" Xiao Xian took out another piece, but did not immediately hand it over. Instead, he said, "Answer a few of my questions first, and I'll give you the jerky in my hand." The old man frowned and did not speak. It seemed that he was not very willing. Xiao Xian did not mind. He raised his finger and pointed, asking, "Walk that way. How long will it take to see the dense forest?" After hearing Xiao Xian's question, the old man's frown relaxed. He had thought that it was some other question, but it turned out to be this. "I don't know. I've never been there. It's my first time here. However, as far as I know, you won't see the dense forest for at least 2 days. It's all the same as here." The old man replied, "This is a famous wasteland. There isn't even a tribe here. Even if you walk for 2 more days, you won't see anyone else." After handing the jerky to the old man, Xiao Xian went to the stream to wash his face and continued on his way. The old man was energetic after eating the jerky and could walk. Xiao Xian did not need to be nosy anymore. However, Xiao Xian had only taken a few steps when the old man's voice came from behind him. "Hey, wait, little brother." Just a moment ago, he had been on guard against Xiao Xian like he was guarding against a thief. Now he was calling him little brother so intimately. Usually, when someone called someone so intimately, there must be some other intention. Xiao Xian turned around and looked at the old man, asking him what was going on. The old man got up from the ground and looked around. His eyes stopped at one spot and he happily pointed in that direction there. "It's that grass with white stripes. Pick some for me." From his tone, it was as if he was ordering people around. Xiao Xian looked at the place the old man was pointing at. It was almost vertical to the ground at a 90-degree angle. At least 30 meters above the ground, there were a few grasses that were half an arm's length with white stripes growing there. Xiao Xian wanted to turn around and leave, but seeing that the old man did not seem to realize that his tone was wrong, Xiao Xian thought for a moment and shook his head. Forget it, he would not argue with the old man. Besides, he also wanted to know what the grasses with white stripes were for. In such an unfamiliar place, it was always good to know more. Chapter 358. Although the mountain wall was almost perpendicular to the ground and was difficult for many people to climb, it was nothing for Xiao Xian. After all, he had climbed this kind of mountain wall many times when he was hunting in the tribe, so he was very familiar with it. The old man stood below and watched Xiao Xian nimbly climb up the mountain wall from below like a gecko sticking to the wall. He seemed to be at ease and didn't seem to be strenuous at all. Seeing this, the old man couldn't help but raise his white eyebrows. He stared at Xiao Xian's back with shining eyes. Xiao Xian, who was climbing up the mountain wall, sensed something. He stopped and looked back, just in time to meet the old man's gaze. The old man smiled unusually amiably. He waved at Xiao Xian and pointed at the grass on the mountain wall, saying, "Go on, go on." Xiao Xian suppressed the doubts in his heart and continued to climb up. He reached out to grab the grass, intending to pull it down directly. "Hey, don't pull it, don't pull it. If you use it to dig it, the roots will stay longer. Use my knife to dig it. Catch." The old man took out a strange-looking copper knife from his leather bag and threw it at Xiao Xian. So troublesome. Xiao Xian cursed in his heart. The throw was accurate. Xiao Xian caught the depression in the mountain wall with one hand and caught the knife with the other. He then used the knife to dig up the grass with white stripes. The knife looked strange, but it was very suitable for digging up grass that grew on the mountain wall. It didn't take long for him to dig up the grass, roots included. "Catch!" Xiao Xian threw the knife and the grass down. The old man hurried over, ignoring the falling knife and carefully catching the falling grass. "What are you using this grass for?" Xiao Xian asked as he came down from the mountain wall and saw the old man cut a leaf and put it in his mouth. "Medicine. It's useful for bone injuries." The old man didn't say much. He just kept chewing the leaf, the muscles on his face twitching. When he was almost done, he swallowed it. After tasting it for a moment, he felt that it wasn't enough, so he cut off a smaller leaf and continued chewing. Thinking of the bone injury on the old man's arm, Xiao Xian memorized the appearance of the grass. When the old man chewed the grass, he seemed to be in pain. Xiao Xian asked, "How does it taste?" The old man didn't say much. He cut off a small leaf and handed it to Xiao Xian. "Try it. You can eat it even when you're not injured?" "Yes. As long as you don't eat too much, you'll be fine." "All right." Xiao Xian took the leaf. He didn't look at it carefully when he was digging earlier, but now he realized that the veins of the grass were harder than he had imagined. Especially the thickest veins with white stripes, they seemed to produce a crisp sound if he tried to break them. Xiao Xian bit the tip of the leaf first. Feeling the cool, bitter taste, he didn't find anything wrong with his body, so he bit another half of the leaf and chewed. This time, he ate more of the veins, so the strong bitterness suppressed the cool taste. No wonder the old man's face twitched when he chewed. It was so bitter. The old man originally wanted to see Xiao Xian stomp his feet in pain, but he found that Xiao Xian just frowned and didn't have any other expression. Could it be that his sense of taste is bad? The old man thought. If so, this young man is really pitiful. He can't taste the world. Ignoring the old man's thoughts, Xiao Xian finished chewing the whole leaf. The bitter taste gradually disappeared, and the cool taste lingered. His exhaustion disappeared a lot. As for his bones, because there were no bone injuries, Xiao Xian didn't feel much. He only felt that some strength seemed to flow into his bones. Since the old man was fine, Xiao Xian planned to leave. This time, as soon as Xiao Xian moved, the old man hurriedly stopped him. "Hey, wait. You want to go that way? I'll go with you." The old man stood up and carefully put the white striped grass into a cloth bag. Xiao Xian turned to look at the old man. He didn't say anything, waiting for the old man to continue. "I came here to look for something. Although I don't know much about this area, I know more things than you. Don't be fooled by the fact that this place is very desolate. There are many poisonous things here. If something happens to you, I can help you." The old man said. "What else?" Xiao Xian asked. "It's not easy for me to move. If I find something, you can help." The old man thought that this was a very good idea. "Okay, that's it." However, Xiao Xian ignored him and continued to follow the route of the plan. The old man hurriedly followed and continued to persuade Xiao Xian. When the old man's saliva was almost dry, Xiao Xian asked, "What are you looking for here?" "Looking for?" The old man paused. He seemed to have some concerns and didn't want to say it. "Forget it if you don't want to say it." Seeing Xiao Xian quicken his pace, the old man took a few steps forward and sighed. "Have you ever heard of 1,000 gold grains?" "1,000 gold grains?" The word gold in the name definitely didn't refer to gold or metal. Since the old man was here, he should be looking for a plant. Since the word gold was in the name, it either referred to the color or to highlight its value. Thinking about it, Xiao Xian shook his head and said, "Never heard of it." The old man looked at Xiao Xian with an ignorant expression and said, "I came here to look for 1,000 gold grains. It is said that 1,000 gold grains can produce 1,000 grains per plant. It is also drought-resistant and can grow in barren land with very little rain." "Food crops? So you came here to try your luck?" Xiao Xian asked. This place was indeed barren. Although there were streams and springs in the mountains, there was not much rain in this place, and it was dry. "Yes, we grow food there. In the past 2 years, there has been less rain. It is said that the drought will continue for a few years." Speaking of this, the old man was very emotional. But it was useless to complain, so he came to look for these drought-resistant food crops. "Aren't there witches and sorcerers? Can't they pray for rain?" Xiao Xian asked again. He didn't know if the tribes here could pray for rain, so he asked this question just to test the waters. In this place, in addition to some tribal sorcerers, there were some independent professional sorcerers. Many people would pay these sorcerers to solve some problems that others couldn't solve. When the old man heard this, his face showed anger. "Don't mention it, a bunch of trash. Descendants of the ancient sorcerers, you can't even pray for rain." "Bah!" Xiao Xian was speechless. People who dared to bob the sorcerers, Xiao Xian had only seen one so far, and he was almost starved to death. The people of the Maka tribe absolutely did not dare to bob the sorcerers. Most of the people he had seen until now held a kind of awe for the sorcerers. Except for the one next to him. If they couldn't solve the problem of rain, they could only work on crops. No matter what the old man's temper was, traveling thousands of miles to find a solution was admirable. "That 1,000 gold grain, what does it look like?" Xiao Xian asked. "It's 1,000 gold grains. I haven't seen it with my own eyes." "How can you find it if you haven't seen it?" "I'll be able to recognize it when I see it." The old man didn't think there was a problem at all. "Right, what's your name?" the old man asked. "Xiao Xian, what about you?" "My name is Gui." The old man also wrote the words on the ground with a branch. The old man didn't ask which tribe Xiao Xian was from. He was not interested in which tribe Xiao Xian came from. Xiao Xian was about to ask again. He wanted to inquire about some things about the Yanjiao tribe from the old man, but he heard the old man suddenly say, "That, Xiao Xian something, take that off for me." "No, I'm not your slave." Xiao Xian didn't look back. Seeing that Xiao Xian was going away, the old man realized the problem with his tone. He quickly slowed down and stepped forward to pull Xiao Xian. "Do me a favor, take that off for me." Chapter 359. Xiao Xian didn't expect the old man to change his commanding tone. He was probably used to ordering people around and couldn't change it in a short time. It was already rare for him to say the word help. Seeing the old man so agitated, Xiao Xian looked in the direction he was pointing. It was another stalk of grass growing on the mountain wall. However, this stalk of grass looked very ordinary, without any patterns. Compared to the grass around Xiao Xian's feet, its leaves were slightly narrower and longer. "What kind of grass is that? What's it used for?" Xiao Xian asked. "I don't know." "Xiao Xian, why are you so agitated if you don't know?" "I'm agitated because I don't know. I've never seen that kind of grass before." The old man stared straight at the mountain wall and urged Xiao Xian, "Hurry up." Xiao Xian shook his head and didn't want to lower himself to the old man's level. However, it was only a matter of time for Xiao Xian to go up the mountain wall and pick the grass. It wasn't difficult, so Xiao Xian didn't think too much about it. Just like before, Xiao Xian used the old man's knife to dig up the grass and threw it to the old man. Other than some herbs that were often used in the tribe and some recorded plants, Xiao Xian didn't recognize many other plants. After coming here, there were even more plants that he didn't recognize. Xiao Xian didn't know what was so special about this stalk of grass, and wanted to see how the old man would treat it. After carefully observing and smelling it, the old man cut off a leaf and bit the tip, tasting it carefully. "Is there any smell?" Xiao Xian asked. The old man shook his head, "No smell." "It's strange, there's not even the smell of grass." "What do you think?" Xiao Xian asked again. "What do I think? I have a bad feeling." The old man commented. "If you don't feel good, why are you still eating?" Xiao Xian watched the old man eat a whole leaf. Then, the old man's face began to twitch. It wasn't the kind of twitching from the bitter taste, but from an uncontrollable twitch. His face turned a strange greenish gray. It was poisonous. "Spit it out," Xiao Xian hurriedly said. He looked around, broke off a branch, and peeled off the outer skin, intending to help the old man vomit. The old man, whose face was quickly turning green, saw that Xiao Xian was about to touch his throat with the branch. He knew what Xiao Xian was going to do, so he turned his head to avoid the branch. He even reached out his arm to push Xiao Xian. "Ni Yuan Kai." Xiao Xian was stunned for a moment before he realized that the old man was telling him to leave because he was in the way. "Fine, I'll leave then." Xiao Xian thought to himself, "I'm not the one who got poisoned. Why should I be anxious?" Xiao Xian thought that the old man would vomit himself, or take out some hidden herbs to detoxify the poison. However, the old man's behavior surprised Xiao Xian. The old man's face was ashen, and the wrinkles on his face had deepened due to the pain. His entire face was scrunched up, and it was obvious that he was in great pain. After staggering 2 steps, the old man sat down against the mountain wall. "Hey, old Jew, are you really okay? Don't you want to eat something to detoxify the poison?" Xiao Xian advised. The old man didn't speak. He just waved his hand weakly and sat there motionless. He didn't speak, and his eyes were closed. If it weren't for the slight rise and fall of his chest, at first glance, one would think that he had already stopped breathing. His breath was weakening. Xiao Xian stared at the old man. Is this old man looking for death? Eating something he hasn't seen before, and not vomiting after eating it. He's just holding back the poison. Isn't he looking for death? Is he tired of living? Suddenly, Xiao Xian noticed that some black veins had appeared on the old man's body. They looked like extended leaves. On his face, arms, and the parts of his body that were exposed outside his clothes, there were these black veins. Totem tattoos? A ball of fire appeared in Xiao Xian's mind. This ball of fire was the source of the old man's strength. However, the difference was that there was a vague shadow in this ball of fire. It looked like a stalk of grass or something else. It couldn't be seen clearly because it was surrounded by the fire. The blue and red flames intertwined. Not only did it not weaken, but it seemed to be burning more and more fiercely. The flames surged and expanded. Within the ball of fire, there was a faint shadow like a weak seedling, growing and growing. Looking at the veins on the old man's body, the original black veins gradually turned into a bright green. The old man's face also began to recede. The aura of death was expelled, and in its place was an extremely strong aura of life. When the old man's face completely disappeared, the green veins also faded away. Everything returned to normal. Just by looking at the old man's current appearance, no one would have thought that the old man had just eaten a piece of poisonous grass and almost died. If Xiao Xian hadn't seen it with his own eyes, he would never have thought of it. No wonder he was so fearless. Just now, he had pushed him away with such force. It turned out that he had the ability to save his life. Xiao Xian calmed down. The old man let out a long breath and opened his eyes. He carefully looked at the seemingly inconspicuous grass in his hand that he hadn't put down. His eyes lit up. Seeing the old man carefully put away the grass, Xiao Xian asked, "Are you really okay?" "I'm fine. It's just a little poison." The old man didn't care. His casual tone showed that he really didn't care about the seemingly dangerous situation just now. Only this old man would be like this. If it were anyone else, they would have already died from the poison. Since I entered the mountain until now, I have already tasted more than 100 types of grass. There are also poisonous ones, but this one isn't the most poisonous. The old man said casually. Xiao Xian caught a glimpse of pride in the old man's eyes. He wanted to praise him, but he directly swallowed it back. He thought that Xiao Xian would be amazed. Who knew that after waiting for a while, when he looked up, the old man saw that Xiao Xian had already left. He didn't care about anything else and hurriedly chased after Xiao Xian. He was still counting on Xiao Xian to help him pick the grass. Before he met Xiao Xian, he also saw a lot of unfamiliar grass, but he couldn't pick it. He even broke an arm, so he could only give up. Now it was different. Having someone to help him pick the grass really saved him a lot of trouble. Because of the old man, Xiao Xian didn't take the shortest route. Sometimes he would climb the mountain to find some plants. The general direction didn't change, but the distance was longer. Xiao Xian followed the old man and collected some poisons and medicines. He also learned about a lot of plants. It was rare to meet someone who would listen to him. When the old man was in the mood, he would tell him about the distribution of various herbs. He had been to many places, so he knew a lot. From the old man's words, Xian not only learned about various medicinal plants, but also the distribution of some tribes and cities. Overall, this trip was worth it. The old man told Xian that he could judge what was in a direction based on some flying insects, what kind of changes were happening to the plants there. Different insects had different preferences. If he was looking for something, this could save a lot of time. Of course, in addition to these flying insects, you can also judge by some other beasts, such as... The old man was about to point to a small bird and was about to say something when his ears quickly shook twice. The old man's eyes flashed. He didn't care about the bird anymore and looked in a direction. At the same time, he raised his hand to signal Xian not to make a sound. Xian looked in that direction. There was a cluster of low grass, which was the densest grass in the area. And behind the grass, there was an animal with grayish-white fur that looked very much like a mouse hiding behind it. After carefully listening to the movements around it, it stuck its head out, propped up its front body, sniffed the air, and then jumped out with a whoosh. "Quick, follow it." The old man suppressed his excitement and whispered to Xian. Chapter 360. A wild mountain rat could make the old man so excited. It probably had something to do with the 1,000 gold grains that the old man had mentioned. Xian didn't wait any longer and quickly followed the wild rat. The wild rat ran very fast, but it would stop and look around vigilantly when it stopped. If it didn't find any threat, it would continue to run. Xian could only use some short trees or tall grass as cover. The plants in this area didn't grow well, so there weren't many things that could be used as cover. It was a little difficult to follow them quietly. For Xian, even if it was difficult, he could overcome it and successfully follow the wild rat. But the old man couldn't. His hiding skills weren't as good as Xian's, so he could only follow from a distance. Fortunately, he didn't have to keep an eye on the wild rat. He just had to follow Xian. After about 20 minutes, the wild rat finally stopped. Xian stood not far away and watched the wild rat enjoy its food. He turned around and waved to the old man who was following behind him. Even if Xian didn't recognize the plant, he was sure that it wasn't the 1,000 gold grains that the old man had mentioned. It was just a 1-meter-tall shrub with some red fruits the size of a pinky nail. The wild rat's target was those red fruits. Looking at the wild rat eating the fruit until its eyes narrowed, the old man sighed. What a pity. However, the old man didn't have much hope. He knew that the 1,000 gold grains weren't easy to find, so he was mentally prepared. After the wild rat enjoyed its food, it slowly ran in another direction. It was still running, but not as fast as before. Some birds smaller than sparrows flew over in the sky and pecked at the fruits. Before the birds finished pecking, the old man quickly grabbed a handful of the fruits and threw them into his mouth one by one. There was a raised stone on the ground next to him. The old man sat there and ate the fruit while looking around the mountain. "Do you know this tree?" Xian asked. "No, it's my first time eating it," the old man said. Xian pursed his lips and reached out to pluck a few fruits from the low shrub and tossed them into his mouth. It was a little sweet, and the taste was not bad. No wonder the wild rat rushed here. When hunting in the forest, if they saw an unknown plant, even if the fruit looked tempting, the hunting warriors would not touch it unless they saw other animals eating it. Only then would they try it bit by bit, and then confirm whether it could be included in the menu. However, this old man obviously relied on his detoxification physique to eat recklessly. Xian believed that even if he hadn't seen the scene of the wild rat and the bird, the old man would still eat it. "Old Jew, why do you want to try all kinds of trees and flowers? Using your own body to test the poison?" "That's right. Whether it's poison or medicine with great benefits, we have to try it before we know. There are still many things waiting to be discovered in the future. Our clan has been experimenting countless times since our ancestors. The things that we eat and use are all obtained through taste and body testing. Daggers, baskets, beds, mattresses, pillows, tea, wine, vinegar, sugar, oil, which one of them was not experimented with by our ancestors." As he spoke, the old man's eyes showed incomparable reverence. He even stopped eating the fruit, and with infinite emotion he said, "Our descendants will inherit the will of our ancestors and shine through the ages. Our achievements will last forever." Xian watched the old man's spittle flying, impassioned and impassioned. This old man really wanted to carry forward his ancestors' entrepreneurial spirit, pioneering spirit, and self-preservation spirit. The old man's biggest goal now was to find the 1,000-grain gold that was once mentioned in the ancestors' notes before he died. "Even if it's just a meeting, I'll be satisfied," the old man said. Since he saw the 1,000-grain gold mentioned in the ancestors' notes, the old man couldn't sleep or eat well, especially now that many places were dry and the harvest of grain crops was poor. Nowadays, not everyone was willing to go hunting. Many people with low abilities, and those who advocated comfort, were used to digging for food from the ground. Not many people were willing to go to the distant mountains and forests to fight with ferocious beasts. Moreover, there were not many beasts around the places where many people gathered. If they wanted to hunt, they would have to go to further places. Moreover, the dense mountains and forests had been occupied by some fierce tribes. Those people were not easy to talk to. If there was a disagreement, they would start a fight, especially those with horns. If they could find more drought-resistant grain crops, the current situation could be alleviated to a certain extent. As for the rain mentioned by Xiao Xian, there were people praying every year, but unfortunately, they couldn't get it. Thinking of this, the old man was angry. Those people claimed to be the descendants of the ancient witch tribe. They collected the salary quickly, but when it came to praying for rain, they found excuses. What a bunch of useless people. After the break, the two continued to walk along the main route, only occasionally going up the mountain. 2 days later, there was still no sign of the 1,000-grain gold. In these 2 days, the old man was poisoned 4 times because he encountered strange plants. One of them even bled from the 7 orifices. It was very scary. Xiao Xian thought that the old man couldn't survive, but after a long time, the old man continued to look for the 1,000-grain gold. In this regard, Xiao Xian had to sigh at the strength of the old man's detoxification system. Most of the time, Xiao Xian listened to the old man talk, occasionally saying a few words, but most of the time he was just a listener. From the old man's words, Xiao Xian could speculate some things. For example, the old man was not from a tribe, but from a city under the jurisdiction of a slave owner. The old man himself was a slave owner. Xiao Xian was the first to see such a slave owner. His previous impression of slave owners was the group of people on the other side of the desert. Now it was rare to meet a slave owner who was different. "No, I'm going to rest for a while. You look around." The old man leaned on a branch and sat down against the mountain wall. "I'm old. I can't compare to the past. Back then, don't think about the past. Go to sleep, and hurry up," Xiao Xian said. Because he was with the old man, Xiao Xian slowed down a lot. He wasn't taking the shortest route either. After walking for 2 days, he didn't feel like there were any trees around him. He wasn't sure if he'd be able to see a dense forest after 2 more days at this speed. Since he agreed to go with the old man, Xiao Xian wouldn't leave him halfway. He was not particularly in a hurry. In this barren place, Xiao Xian hadn't seen a large beast, but he did see a few human skeletons. Glancing around, Xiao Xian recalled the useful plants that the old man had introduced to him today. If he saw them in his field of vision, Xiao Xian would silently review them in his heart. As he was thinking, Xiao Xian heard running sounds. The sound wasn't loud, but listening to the sound and rhythm, it was very similar to the wild rats he had followed before. If it was just one, it wouldn't be a big deal, but Xiao Xian heard several. Could it be that this was a wild rat nest? Xiao Xian stood up and looked in the direction of the sound. Several wild rats came from different directions, running in the same direction. They didn't look like they were running for their lives, but more like the previous wild rat looking for fruit, with eagerness and desire. "Old Jew. Hey, wake up, there's a situation with old Jew." Xiao Xian pushed the sleeping old man. "What's wrong?" Because Xiao Xian was watching over him, the old man rarely fell asleep without worry. Before he could sleep enough, he was woken up by Xiao Xian, and for a moment he was a little confused. Xiao Xian was about to tell the old man about his discovery, but before he could open his mouth, the old man's ears twitched as he heard the movements around him. This was completely a professional conditioned reflex. When he heard other sounds, he directly ignored them. Only certain sounds could stimulate his nerves in the shortest amount of time. With a shiver, the old man was so excited that he didn't feel sleepy anymore. Looking around, the old man threw away the wooden stick he was using as a crutch and climbed up the mountain wall. The view here wasn't good, so he had to go to a higher place to look. But there weren't any thick trees around, and looking at the surrounding terrain, the most time-saving way was to climb the mountain wall. Hey, slow down a bit. Xiao Xian was afraid that the old man would slip and fall, so he was on guard below. If the old man got excited and fell down, he could still catch him. However, the old man was too agitated to care so much. He only wanted to climb up the ladder. Xiao Xian saw that the old man was having a hard time climbing, so he helped him. After climbing up, the old man's radar-like eyes scanned the surroundings, his ears twitching as he scanned. He was probably trying to distinguish the sounds he wanted from the surrounding noise. Chapter 361. After looking at the wall, the old man's hands and feet were trembling when he came down. He was not afraid, but excited. He felt that climbing down was too slow, so the old man let Xiao Xian catch him from below. Without waiting for Xiao Xian to say anything, the old man had already let go of his hand and jumped down. Xiao Xian wanted to curse, but he did not have time to do so. He quickly caught the old man who jumped down. This time it's definitely it. After the old man came down, he hurriedly walked in one direction. That was the direction the wild rats were running towards. Even if it's not the 1,000-grain gold, it must be something special to make these wild rats behave like this. The old man walked as if he was flying. After a good night's sleep, he was much more energetic. This time, he used all his strength to keep up. Xiao Xian was also curious about what had made these wild rats so crazy. As he ran forward, some wild rats jumped out from other places. When they saw Xiao Xian, the wild rats only paused for a short while before continuing to run. It seemed that compared to Xiao Xian, the strange creature on the other side was more attractive to them. Therefore, they did not pay much attention to Xiao Xian's existence and only focused on running. There weren't so many wild rats running around before. Why are there suddenly so many of them? Xiao Xian asked. It must be that thing that's about to be cooked. The old man did not say much. He just sped up again. After waiting for so long and searching for so many years, he once again saw hope. Although he had encountered similar situations before, where he did not find the 1,000-grain gold but other precious herbs, this time, he had a strong premonition. Back then, his ancestors' notes also mentioned that when he found the 1,000-grain gold, he saw the activity of the surrounding rats. However, there was too little information recorded in the notes, and the old man could not get much information from it. He could only search again and again. This time, it must be. It must be. The old man roared in his heart. From the time Xiao Xian had known the old man until now, although it had only been a few days, it was the first time he saw the old man running so fast. His eyes were filled with fanaticism. At this time, if anyone came to block the way, the old man would probably fight them to the death. The further he ran, the more wild rats he encountered. It seemed that the wild rats living nearby, whether hiding in caves or underground, nearby or far away, all ran out and rushed to the same place as if they were going to a market. They even had a kind of courage to move forward. The commotion in the surroundings also attracted some other animals, but their target was only these wild rats. An animal that looked like a weasel intercepted several wild rats, and then swaggered away with its prey in its mouth. There was also a stupid-looking weasel standing there, as if it was going to intercept them. However, the wild rats had an urgent momentum. They did not slow down at all, nor did they change their direction. They rushed over, jumped up, stepped on the weasel, and jumped over. The other beasts did the same. Normally, these wild rats would definitely not have the courage to do so. They would definitely avoid the threat. Even if they saw their own kind being taken away, they would not give them a second look, and would not stay for a second longer. However, as they got closer and closer to their target, the group of rats grew stronger and the number of robbing animals decreased a lot. Probably after seeing such a situation, they did not dare to hunt alone. If they failed, they would be bitten instead. Xiao Xian and the old man followed these wild rats until they came to a place near the top of a mountain, where they were forced to stop. Why were they forced to stop? Because they could only go this far. Any further, and they would be occupied by wild rats. At the same time, wild rats rushed over from afar to join such a huge team. Although this scale was not comparable to the insect swarm led by Sapphire in the desert, this was a barren mountain after all. There were not many animals to be seen on a normal day, so it was shocking to see thousands of wild rats all of a sudden. The wild rats that stopped also wanted to squeeze forward, but there were only rats in front of them. There was no open space at all. The ones at the front were especially big. When they were annoyed by the squeezing, they turned around and bit a few to death to intimidate them. When they saw that the ones at the back had stopped squeezing forward, they turned back with satisfaction and continued to stare at the top of the mountain, at the few plants swaying in the wind. Since they could not squeeze forward, the wild rats at the back stood up and stretched their necks to look obliquely at the top. They were originally a lump on the ground, but when they stood up and stretched, they looked like poles. Xiao Xian also saw the plants growing at the top of the mountain. The upright stalks were very thick, about the height of a person, and the leaves were long and narrow. Several dark golden grains drooped from each plant, giving people a heavy feeling. Gusts of wind blew, and the grains swayed. The old man who stopped panted heavily, his nostrils expanding and contracting. His gaze was fixed on the highest place on the top of the mountain, not moving at all, as if that was the only thing left in the whole world. The fanaticism and excitement in the old man's eyes were rising. His fists hanging by his side were clenched, and he couldn't wait to rush over and dig up those plants and take them away. "That's the 1,000 gold grain?" Xiao Xian asked in a low voice. "Yes, it must be." The old man's throat emitted a suppressed excitement. His whole person seemed to ignore everything around him, immersed in his own world, and became crazy. Ha! Ha 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 ha! Found it! I finally found it! Xiao Xian's eyelids twitched a few times, and a bad feeling suddenly rose. Sure enough, the moment the old man laughed loudly, the grayish-white wild rats in front of him turned around and looked at him. Their small eyes emitted a fierce light, especially those closest to the top of the mountain, whose bodies were obviously at least 2 or 3 times larger than the other wild rats. Their eyes were even glowing red, revealing a murderous intent. The few large wild rats at the top of the mountain looked at the swaying dark golden grains, and then turned to look at the old man who was also staring at the grains with burning eyes. They suddenly became angry, stood up, and opened their mouths to make a series of sharp squeaking sounds. Xiao Xian thought to himself, "Oh no!" He lifted the old man's clothes, and the totemic power in his body suddenly surged. The magma-like totemic patterns appeared, accompanied by the vibration of the air around him, and shook away the wild rats that jumped over with their mouths open. He exerted strength in his legs and ran down the mountain. Probably because they were concerned about the grains at the top of the mountain, the wild rats didn't dare to chase him down. They were afraid that if they ran away, they wouldn't be able to come back in time to snatch the feast. On the other side, Xiao Xian ran to the mountainside while carrying the old man. Seeing that the wild rats didn't chase after him, he stopped and put the old man down. The old man didn't look at the totemic patterns on Xiao Xian's body. At this time, there was nothing in his eyes except for the few plants at the top of the mountain. His heart was occupied by the dark golden grains. As soon as he was put down, the old man wanted to continue running up the mountain, but Xiao Xian forcibly held him down. "Let go, I want to go there. Those are 1,000 grain gold. Do you know 1,000 grain gold?" The old man struggled and shouted, "I don't care if it's 1,000 grain gold or 1,000 grain shit. I only know that it's been taken over by the wild rats. Do you want to feed the wild rats?" Xiao Xian shouted. When the old man heard this, he gradually came back to his senses. He repeated Xiao Xian's words, "Taken over by the wild rats?" Thinking of the wild rats at the top of the mountain, the old man suddenly became unhappy. No, 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 those wild rats can't spoil them. Fortunately, he was still rational. The old man walked in circles, thinking of the best way. Those grains are not fully ripe yet. The wild rats are probably waiting for the final moment of ripening. We just need to hurry and get rid of those wild rats before the grains ripen. The old man said, "How do we get rid of them?" Xiao Xian asked. It wasn't that he didn't have a way. If he forced himself to fight with the group of wild rats, he could do it, but he would have to pay a price. After all, there were too many wild rats, and the few that were closest to the top of the mountain were harder to deal with than the others. If they fought, there was no guarantee that the plants at the top of the mountain would be intact. The old man also considered all kinds of situations. After thinking for a while, his tightly knitted brows relaxed. He called Xiao Xian, "Follow me." Chapter 362. Xiao Xian followed the old man around the mountain. If he saw a plant he needed, the old man would go up and pick it. A short brown bush was cut off by the old man, and a spiral-shaped tree was peeled off. There were also some flowers that Xiao Xian had never seen before. The old man also picked the flowers. You are going to... Xiao Xian saw the old man's actions and asked, "Put down that group of wild rats." The old man's tone was stern. For the suspected 1,000-grain gold plants, he was determined to get them. He would never let those wild rats eat the grain. Poison them? Xiao Xian asked. There were also a lot of wild rats. If he wanted to poison those wild rats, even if he used herbs, the amount would be very large, unless he used a special medicine. However, the old man did not want to directly poison this group of wild rats. They are useful in this barren mountain. If there are more 1,000-grain gold in the future, we may need to rely on them to find it. I can't poison them all. I just want to poison them. The old man's hands were already full. Although there was not much grass growing in every part of the mountain, and there was even less grass to pick, the old man was in a hurry. He was also familiar with the places where some plants might grow. In just a short while, his hands were already full. I'll take it. You continue. Xiao Xian took the grass from the old man's hands. The old man did not insist. When he handed the grass to Xiao Xian, he warned, "Be careful, don't touch the cut. It won't be good if the grass juice gets on it. Also, don't get close to smell it. If you pour it in advance, I won't be able to put down all those wild rats." The two quickened their pace. The movement of the wild rats indicated that the grain on the top of the mountain would soon be fully ripe. They had to hurry. Following the old man, Xiao Xian also learned a lot, but not to the extent of the old man's ability to use materials at any time. Because they were in a hurry, the old man would not say much. Xiao Xian could only watch and remember. Maybe it would be useful in the future. The mountain seemed to be full of short trees and weeds, but for people like the old man, it was actually full of treasures. Whether it was a waste or a treasure, it depended on the person. Some plants alone might not have much ability, but when combined together, it was different. What the old man wanted to concoct was a medicine that was a mixture of many kinds of plants. Okay, that's it. The old man began to take out things to prepare for the production. A small copper cauldron and a few oddly shaped knives were all that was needed to deal with all of this. Xiao Xian, go to the foot of the mountain and look for more one-line sorrow. Look for those that have a small opening. Don't take those that haven't opened, and don't take those that have opened completely. Old Ju did not lift his head as he spoke to Xiao Xian. His hands were busy, and he simply had no time to leave, nor could he match Xiao Xian's speed. Okay. Xiao Xian didn't say much. He knew what kind of plant the old man was talking about. On the way, the old man had taught him how to recognize it. Xiao Xian remembered that the Daline plants mostly grew in the valley between two mountains. He had seen a lot of them when he walked along the narrow part of the valley. The Balaim shrub was not tall enough to reach Xiao Xian's waist. This was the old man's own name for the shrub. Running down the mountain, Xiao Xian looked around and saw a line. The so-called a line was because when the fruit of this shrub was about to mature, a line would appear on the fruit with a hard shell. Then as the fruit became more and more mature, the line would crack. The wind and sun would dry up the inside of the fruit, leaving only a small core. When the time was right, the cracked fruit would completely open and the core inside would be ejected. Xiao Xian tried it once and was hit by the core ejected from the fruit. It was quite painful. If it weren't for Xiao Xian's thick skin, perhaps his skin would have been broken. Generally, after the fruit of this plant cracked, there would be no other beasts around. In the old man's words, seeing the line on the fruit makes you worried. You can't get close. You'll get hurt if you get close. If it was not plucked properly, it would also stimulate the split fruit to shoot out the core in advance. That was why the old man had demonstrated twice to Xiao Xian, telling him how to pluck the one-line worib correctly. Compared to the previous 2 days, there were more and more fruits with lines and cracks on the tree, but he didn't know which ones were needed by the old man. Some of the cracks were still shallow and may not meet the old man's requirements. After thinking about it, Xiao Xian directly cut off the branches that were more densely packed with fruit. After finding more than 10 trees in a row and cutting off a lot of branches with fruit, Xiao Xian went up the mountain. The old man said that the wild rats on the mountain were waiting for the moment when the ear was really ripe. When the ear reached the most perfect moment, the wild rats could get what they wanted from it. Maybe the bigger rats at the front of the group of wild rats had eaten a lot of 1,000-grain gold and grew up like that. Or after getting it, he could also cook some for himself? While thinking, Xiao Xian went up the mountain with the cut branches. When Xiao Xian arrived, the old man had already lit the fire. The various kinds of grass next to it were almost ready. There was a pungent smell coming out of the copper cauldron. "You stay away." The old man waved at Xiao Xian and let Xiao Xian put down the things and move away. After all, Xiao Xian didn't have a detoxification physique like the old man. He was afraid that Xiao Xian would collapse if he smelled too much of the smell. When Xiao Xian smelled the smell, he felt a little dizzy, so he moved his feet and stood about 10 meters away from the small cauldron. The fire was very strong, and steam kept coming out of the copper cauldron. The old man squatted next to it and stared, his eyes never leaving the small cauldron. He kept stirring it with his knife. "It's done!" The old man shouted excitedly and put out the fire. He picked up the branch that Xiao Xian brought and quickly picked up the fruit that met his requirements. Then he held the fruit in one hand and picked up 2 strange knives with the other hand. He scraped some powder from the small cauldron and poured the powder into the fruit through the gap between the fruit's opening. Each fruit was about the size of a quail egg, and the gap on the fruit was even narrower. However, the old man only held the knife with one hand and used the 2 strange knives to pour the powder in. The powder that leaked out was almost negligible. No wonder he brought so many strange knives. It turned out that he used them for this. After pouring the powder in, the old man covered the gaps with a thin, almost transparent layer of leaf skin. This way, the fine powder wouldn't leak out. He quickly poured the powder into all the fruits he picked and sealed the leaf skin. The old man picked up the last fruit with the least amount of powder and looked around. Not far away, a small bird was pecking at insects on the ground. Aiming at the target, the old man flicked his finger, and the fruit flew straight in that direction. It hit the ground and made a pop sound. The fruit was completely opened, and the core was shot out. At the same time, the powder inside was also sprayed out. Xiao Xian saw the bird flap its wings twice. It looked like it wanted to fly, but after shaking its wings twice, it fell down. "What do you think?" The old man looked at Xiao Xian with a proud face. Obviously, he was very satisfied with what he had made. Xiao Xian looked at the motionless bird on the ground and then at the completely opened and empty fruit shell. He sincerely commented, "It really is a divine artifact." Chapter 363. On the dry and cracked land, the closer to the top of the mountain, the more cracks there were on the ground. There were fewer plants growing around, and in many places, only exposed stones and dry hard soil could be seen. The wind at the top of the mountain gradually weakened, and the sun was scorching. Many wild rats waiting here had begun to feel thirsty, but they did not leave. Their claws only squeezed forward, not backward. Their eyes were fixed on the changing color of the grain on the top of the mountain, and their necks were itching to be thinner and longer, so that they could better see what was on the top of the mountain. The previous dark golden color gradually became lighter, and the dark surface became glossy. From afar, it looked like it was shining with golden light. Squeak! It was unknown which wild rat made a sound. This was like a signal for action, and the wild rats who were holding back their strength instantly moved, rushing forward. The first few big wild rats were about to jump up and bite the grain when they suddenly heard a whooshing sound in their ears. Something shot from behind. Then there was a cracking sound, and an unpleasant smell rose around them. The wild rats who smelled these odors began to fall into a trance, and they could not walk steadily. This was just the beginning. Finally, the dense cracking sound rang out one after another, smashing into the crowd of rats. Xiao Xian held his breath, and while smashing the artifact, he quickly rushed to the top of the mountain, and then stood there, smashing while dealing with the rushing rats. The old man Ju's medicine had already overturned a large number of wild rats. Although it could not solve all the wild rats, it greatly reduced the pressure on Xiao Xian, and it was easy to deal with the rest. After all, they were just wild rats, not ferocious beasts. Xiao Xian smashed the artifact with one hand, and in the other hand, he held a broom-like thing tied with branches. When he saw the wild rats rushing over, he vigorously swept them. In fact, Xiao Xian was more willing to use a fierce weapon, but the old man Ju personally made this broom, saying that it was useful to deal with wild rats, so Xiao Xian used it. Sure enough, after being swept by the broom, the wild rats seemed to be contaminated with something they didn't like. They hesitated and didn't want to immediately approach. As for the big wild rats that had jumped up and bit the ears of the grains, after smelling the smell, they wanted to take the grains in their mouths and fall to the ground. Their legs did not stand firm, and they rolled a few times, but they were able to last longer than the other wild rats. Knowing that things had changed, they ran away with the grains in their mouths. Unfortunately, they were caught by the old man who was guarding outside. The old man used some of the leftover residue from the previous medicine to paint on the branches and leaves, circling around the wooden stick. After igniting the fire was extinguished and smoke rose from the top. The smell of the smoke was more pungent, but unfortunately, the medicinal properties were far less than the powder that had been refined before. It was impossible to achieve the effect of poisoning. However, it was more than enough to deal with these big wild rats. Seeing Xiao Xian blocking the top of the mountain, the old man felt relieved and concentrated on dealing with the rats that had slipped through the net. These must be the ones with the grains in their mouths. Snatching food from the mouths of rats was what the old man wanted to do now. By the time Xiao Xian finished using the artifacts, a large number of wild rats had fallen on the top of the mountain, like a layer of rat skin carpet. As for the wild rats that had escaped the medicine, when they rushed up, they were swept away by Xiao Xian's broom. After the old man finished dealing with the rats that had slipped through the net, he immediately ran to the top of the mountain next to the plants and carefully touched the bunches of grains. Because he wasn't sure if this was an annual plant, he didn't dare to cut it. Otherwise, he would have asked Xiao Xian to cut it all and take it away. He wouldn't have stayed here to fight with the wild rats. Raising his hand and a little bit of force, the old man pulled out all the grains on the grains. Putting all the grains into a cloth bag, the old man called Xiao Xian. "Let's go. Don't worry about the rest of the wild rats." Waiting for the old man's words, Xiao Xian waved the broom, jumped up, and left the place with a few ups and downs. However, when he was out of the rat circle, Xiao Xian caught a few fat wild rats for a meal later. In this barren mountain, it was difficult to see big beasts, and it was not easy to eat meat. Taking advantage of this opportunity to catch a few. Take away the grains and leave those in the same place. Are you not afraid of being destroyed by the wild rats? Don't you feel distressed? Xiao Xian asked the old man. If the old man didn't feel distressed about the plants, thinking that there was still research value, Xiao Xian wouldn't have to work so hard and would have just cut it off. The wild rats are not interested in those. They only want to eat these grains. As for the few that are left there, the roots are too deep. It's not easy to dig them out, and it's not convenient to take them away. Forget it. Next time, wait for me to go back and bring people over. As long as those few plants did not wither before he brought people over, he would transplant all of them to his own field and study them well. Those wild rats that were drugged woke up. I don't know if they will faint again. Aren't you afraid of their revenge? Xiao Xian joked. The old man holding the bag of grains heard Xiao Xian's words and raised his eyebrows. Revenge? Why should I be afraid? The next time I come, I won't give them a chance to retaliate. The next time he came, he would definitely bring more people, so he didn't have to be afraid of those wild rats. Leaving the mountain and looking for a place to sit down and rest, Xiao Xian reached out to the old man. Take it out and let me see what the legendary 1,000-grain gold looks like. I just went to sweep the wild rats and didn't pay attention to it. The old man hesitated and did not open the bag of grains. Instead, he took out a grain from another small bag and put it in Xiao Xian's palm. Xiao Xian looked at the soybean-sized round grain with a golden shell in his hand. There were teeth marks on it. The wild rats had bitten it. Although it was only so big, he could feel the obvious weight in his hand. It was much heavier than Xiao Xian thought. However, Xiao Xian didn't want to give up on such a broken grain. Anyway, I also have some merit. You're only giving me this? Xiao Xian pinched the broken grain and shook it in front of the old man. What do you want this for? The old man held the thing tightly. Eat. Concise and comprehensive. Hearing this, the old man's eyebrows almost stood up. Eat. Aren't these planted for eating? But we haven't started to plant a lot of them yet. These intact ones can only be used as seeds. They can't be eaten. The old man's attitude was very firm. Well, you give me some. I'll go back to the tribe later and plant them. Seeing the old man still want to say something, Xiao Xian added, even if I don't know how to plant them, there must be people in our tribe who know. Don't be stingy. Come on, let's divide. Anyway, there are thousands of grains. There are so many on the top of the mountain. Even if the wild rats took some, we can still get tens of thousands of grains. Let's divide it half and half. Half and half. The old man stared. Impossible. Absolutely impossible. I can give you other things, but I can't give you so much of this. Well, half and half, 3,000 grains. Xiao Xian said. The old man held his breath and didn't say anything. Only the wrinkled skin on his old face twitched, as if he was trying his best to endure. In the end, the old man only gave Xiao Xian 1,000 grains. He still looked like he was cutting his own flesh. Every time he counted a grain, his heart would tremble and his liver would tremble. It was as if he had already foreseen the end of these grains being wasted into Xiao Xian's stomach. If it weren't for you helping me, I wouldn't have given you a single grain, the old man said with a bitter face. Hey, don't be so negative. Maybe you can't grow it, but I can grow it instead? Xiao Xian said. The old man just kept shaking his head. He didn't believe it anyway. Chapter 364. The old man may not have said much about other things, but the things he cared about were limited. 1,000 gold grains was one of them, and it occupied a large part of the old man's heart. You could tell just by looking at how much effort he had put in to come all the way to this desolate land to find it. If Xiao Xian wanted more, no matter what he said, even if they fought, the old man would rather die than agree. 1,000 pills was his last concession. I said I would use other things to make up for it. I don't have much on hand right now, so I can't give it to you. How about this? If you have time in the future, go to the royal city, say my name, and I'll give you whatever you want. The old man said as he handed Xiao Xian a small curved copper knife that looked like a small sickle. This is for you. If you go to the royal city, you can take this and let someone take you to me. Royal city? Xiao Xian was stunned. He raised his head and took the knife, looking at the old man. What is your full name? I am Jiju. Ji. Xiao Xian had heard of it before. That was the surname Wang. Many of the noble slave owners in the royal city had the surname Ji. They were the slave owners who owned the most land. The Ji royal family was also transformed from the people of the former Ji tribe. Later, the Ji tribe gathered all the other 5 major tribes, and Ji was the surname used by the people of the Ji tribe. A long time ago, on this land, the people of the tribe discovered another way to use the fire seed. Some of the tribesmen became slave owners and built cities, while the other maintained the appearance of a tribe. Do you always enslave a lot of slaves? Xiao Xian asked as he put the grains that Jiju handed over into the animal skin bag. Since he was the slave owner with the largest land, there should be a lot of slaves working under him. But Jiju's answer was not so. There are a lot of slaves. After all, I have a lot of land, so I have to let people take care of it. But I only enslave one slave. When Jiju said this, his face was full of pride. The difference between ordinary slaves and enslaved slaves was similar to the difference between wild beasts raised by Yanjiao tribes and engraved wild beasts. Xiao Xian had heard about this on the way, so he wasn't too surprised. He was just a little surprised that Jiju had only enslaved one slave. That must be a very powerful slave, Xiao Xian said. Of course, Huang Didi is a very good slave. He can help me look after the fields. Speaking of this, Jiju missed his slave a little. Yellow Earth? Why did you give him that name? Xiao Xian asked. That's a pretty good name. I came up with it myself. Jiju disagreed with Xiao Xian's question. Also, who said that Huang Tudi is human? Then what is it? Xiao Xian was really curious now. Such an old slave owner had only enslaved one slave, and that only slave was not human. Jiju said proudly, Moo, Xiao Xian. Moo. Bull. Yes. Do you think this slave is particularly good? I enslaved it when it was just a little bit. It's in charge of a large field in my hands. Jiju's old face was blooming. If I have the chance, I'd like to see it for myself, Xiao Xian said. Speaking of his own slave, the old man's depression dissipated a lot. He thought he had a good eye, and the smile on his face did not stop. His attention shifted from the 1,000 grain gold to his bull, and Jiju said a lot. Let me tell you, Xiao Xian, if you want to enslave slaves in the future, you have to pay attention to the first slave, because the first slave is most likely to be the most loyal one, and also the one with the closest connection to your consciousness. No matter how good the other slaves are, they will always be a little worse. This is the commonality of slavery. That's why we slave owners are very careful when choosing the first slave. Some people even don't enslave slaves until they're middle-aged because they can't find a satisfactory slave. Jiju also brought up the topic of slavery. Seeing how Xiao Xian helped him so much, and because he found a plant suspected to be the 1,000 grain gold, He was in a good mood, so he told Xiao Xian all this. In fact, many slave owners know this, but you tribesmen may not. Of course, you tribesmen don't have much interest in enslaving slaves, and the success rate of enslavement is not high. You can't master the trick, Jiju said. Hearing Jiju's words, Xiao Xian's expression was strange. He asked, "The first slave you enslave, is it very important?" "Very important," Jiju said with certainty. "You have to choose carefully?" Xiao Xian asked again. "Yes. You can't enslave it casually?" "Nonsense." Jiju worriedly warned Xiao Xian. "How can you enslave it casually? Our ancestors didn't know that the first slave was the most special, so they didn't pay attention to it. As a result, there were many slaves who betrayed their masters. Because of this, the slaves' characteristics and strengths were scattered, and they weren't loyal enough. Their consciousness wasn't connected tightly enough. That's why the most important thing about slaves is quality, not quantity, especially the first slave." Knowing that the situation here was different from the desert, Xiao Xian didn't ask much. But the first slave, he was too embarrassed to tell Jiju that he actually already had a slave. His first slave was a beetle that pushed a dung ball, and he enslaved it as an experiment. No wonder the blue beetle was so loyal. Xiao Xian could clearly feel the beetle's current state. Although he didn't know what it was doing now, he was sure that Sapphire was living well and strong. Xiao Xian didn't need to worry too much. After talking for a long time, Jiju realized that tribesmen weren't necessarily interested in enslavement. Many tribesmen were generally xenophobic, especially those from the larger tribes. It was said that even finding an outsider as a companion would require tribesmen to review repeatedly. Even if they passed the review, they might not be accepted immediately. "You tribesmen are so troublesome. Right, which tribe are you from?" Jiju kept forgetting to ask Xiao Xian this question. "Yanjiao tribe," Xiao Xian said. On the way here with Jiju, he heard Jiju talk about tribesmen. He mentioned Yanjiao once, but it wasn't much. Jiju's understanding of Yanjiao was limited. He wasn't hostile, but he didn't have a good impression of them. In any case, Xiao Xian was very happy when he heard Jiju mention Yanjiao. "Which one?" Hearing Xiao Xian's answer, Jiju wanted to dig his ears out. "Yanjiao," Xiao Xian said solemnly. "Give me back the 1,000 grains." Jiju reached out. "Don't you Yanjiao hunt? How can you take good care of 1,000 grains?" Yanjiao tribesmen rarely went to the royal city, but once or twice was enough to make a lasting impression. In Jiju's impression, Yanjiao tribesmen were strong. One person could carry a few bears and play with them. They were also rude and violent. Every time a Yanjiao tribesman went to the royal city, they would always send a few nobles flying. They were all rejected by the 6 nobles. However, Yanjiao tribesmen did come out less these years. The last time Jiju saw a Yanjiao tribesman was when he was young. Now, the younger generation might not have seen them. "We Yanjiao tribesmen can also farm," Xiao Xian argued. Yanjiao's history had many records of farming. It was impossible that they couldn't even farm. Bullshit. Jiju was very regretful now. Unfortunately, he couldn't take back the grains he had given away. After a failed attempt, Jiju gave up. Fortunately, his focus was not here. He had to hurry back and bring people back to dig up the 1,000-grain gold plants. The royal city was far from here. Jiju didn't go any further. He parted ways with Xiao Xian. "Right, do you remember where the Yanjiao tribe is?" Xiao Xian asked before they parted. "What, are you lost?" Jiju laughed at his misfortune. However, he really didn't know the exact location of the Yanjiao tribe. "I only know it's deep in the forest. It should be quite far from here. Take your time to find it." Chapter 365. After separating from Jiju, Xiao Xian continued on his journey. Knowing that there was really a Yanjiao tribe here, he felt a lot more at ease. Even if it was still far from the Yanjiao tribe, Xiao Xian still felt relaxed. Without Jiju, Xiao Xian sped up. Along the way, he saw some plants and made some herbs. He prepared some poisons and healing medicines, which Xiao Xian learned from Jiju. When he encountered good stone, he also made some spare stone tools. This was the advantage of stone tools. They were local materials and did not need to be forged. Xiao Xian also made a pot the size of a basin. Of course, it was much deeper than a basin. It was used to boil soup and decoct medicine. There were tube ears on both sides of the stone pot. After the stone pot was used, the straw rope was threaded through the tube ears and then carried on his back. He could take the pot with him whenever he wanted. This dry mountain range was really big. Xiao Xian gradually saw dense grassland on the fourth day after separating from Jiju. After passing the mountain range, the terrain became flat. Looking around, there was a vast grassland. He did not know if it was because of the season or because there was little rain here, but although there was a lot of grass on the ground, it was still dry. Trees suitable for the grassland environment were piled together or isolated in the middle of an empty grassland. This was also a major feature of the grassland here. There was also a river on the grassland, but it was not very big. Along the curved river bank, there were some unknown trees in a corridor on both sides. Compared to the vast grassland, there were not many trees growing here. The grass was rich and varied. Even if Xiao Xian knew a lot of forest grass from Jiju, there were still many unfamiliar things here. Xiao Xian did not have Jiju's detoxification constitution and did not dare to eat carelessly. Even when he was resting, he would choose carefully. Although it looked like an ordinary grassland, there were many hidden dangers. Sometimes, an inconspicuous blade of grass could take a person's life. When they saw Xiao Xian, the bison on the periphery stomped their strong hooves. Their thick and powerful limbs and iron hooves stepped on the grass like iron, easily stomped a hoof-shaped pit. They were demonstrating and warning Xiao Xian. A predator in the shape of a lion was hiding behind the dry shrubs. When it saw this scene, it reluctantly looked away from the herd and shifted its gaze to Xiao Xian. However, when it met Xiao Xian's gaze, the fur on its back stood on end. Its intuition told it to avoid this seemingly insignificant human. In the end, it decided to continue guarding the herd and wait for the right time to attack. Xiao Xian created a suitable hunting opportunity for the big cat. First, he threw some pungent herbs into the herd, causing the herd to become restless. Then, he seized the opportunity to kill a bison and ran away with the bull on his shoulder. The big cat hiding behind the shrubs also took advantage of the opportunity to take advantage of the situation. After eating some of the roasted beef, Xiao Xian took out the stone pot and went to the river to scoop some water. After some thought, he added some 1,000-grain gold. Most of the 1,000-grain gold that he threw into the pot were incomplete grains that had been bitten by wild rats from Jiju. In Jiju's words, these grains did not have a high chance of surviving, but they could be eaten. Xiao Xian did not mind that the grains had been bitten by wild rats. After peeling the shells, he threw the golden grains into the pot and boiled them a little. Although there were too few grains compared to the pot of water, the boiled soup was a little turbid yellow. It had a faint fragrance and was very tempting. After eating too much meat, drinking this pot of soup was a good enjoyment. The cooked grains were soft and sticky in the mouth and tasted good. After drinking the soup, Xiao Xian felt much better. No wonder Jiju did not like the meat of wild animals. Eating this was indeed much better than eating wild animals. However, no matter how good it was for the body, Xiao Xian only had 1,000 grains on hand. 1,000 grains, although it sounded like a lot, when put together, it was only a little. Xiao Xian said that he wanted to try growing 1,000-grain gold. He was not joking. He really had this idea. If it was successful, when he went back to the other side of the sea in the future, he could bring a batch back to improve the lives of his tribe. After eating and resting, Xiao Xian put on his equipment and continued on his journey. The terrain of the grassland was slightly undulating. Sometimes there were raised hills in the wilderness, and occasionally there were some ant nests. 7 days after Xiao Xian stepped into the grassland. Under the clear sky, a few people were galloping on the grassland. Their tamed horses kicked up a trail of dust as they galloped on the dry grassland. Those people were probably having a competition. When they galloped on their horses, there was a fierce atmosphere of a duel. The people on the horses were wearing clothes sewn from a combination of fur and cloth. Their long hair was not cut short and was tied into several small braids. Both men and women had similar hairstyles. There were also some patterns drawn on their faces with paint. Xiao Xian carried 2 roasted bison thighs and a large stone pot on his back. His footsteps were light as he walked on the grassland. Compared to the fast galloping and tense atmosphere on the other side, Xiao Xian, who appeared as a stranger, seemed particularly leisurely. This abrupt style made the rider unable to ignore him. The young man at the front reined in his horse when he got close to Xiao Xian. When the people behind him saw this, they also stopped and looked at Xiao Xian with scrutinizing eyes. 2 of the young men gripped the daggers at their waists and pulled some out. Others put their hands on the knives hanging by the side of their horses. After the leader swept his gaze over Xiao Xian, his eyes became more cautious. However, his face was not as serious as before. With a smile, he asked Xiao Xian where he came from. Seeing the leader like this, the others looked at each other and changed their expressions. The young man who had touched the knife quietly moved his hand away. The one who pulled out the dagger put it back in the leather sheath at their waists. Their eyes paused for a moment on Xiao Xian's extremely special necklace. Then, like the others, they smiled at Xiao Xian, revealing their white teeth. The necklace around Xiao Xian's neck was actually made of bison horns and the fangs and claws of other predatory animals. For this group of people, a person who could hunt these grassland beasts and carry so much weight and still travel so easily was enough to make them think twice before making a move. Although this group of people had a friendly smile when they talked to Xiao Xian, that was because they thought Xiao Xian was not someone to be trifled with. If they were not to be trifled with, they would not trifle with them. If they were easy to bully, they would rob them and kill them. Bullying the weak and fearing the strong, the law of the jungle existed at all times in such a primitive environment. This was also the reason why Xiao Xian had made a necklace out of souvenirs from his hunts. After chatting with these people for a while, Xiao Xian did not directly tell them which tribe he was from. He only said that he had come back from an adventure and could not remember the way. He only asked about the surrounding terrain and gave them a cow's leg as a reward. These people's tribe was nearby, so they were familiar with the area. After receiving Xiao Xian's cow's leg, they heard from Xiao Xian that their tribe was deep in the dense forest. Since they had nothing to do, they pointed the way for Xiao Xian and even freed a horse for Xiao Xian to take Xiao Xian there. Although they had not been to further places and had only been active in the grassland area near their tribe, they had heard from their elders about the dense forest. When they became stronger, they would have the opportunity to be taken out, so they still knew some of the necessary geographical directions. Go straight from here and cross a few more mountains. You should be able to see it, the young leader said. They could only lead the way up to here and could not go any further. It would be dangerous if they went further. Then they looked at Xiao Xian, who was of the same age as them. He was able to travel on this dangerous grassland alone and was still alive and well. Those who were slightly dissatisfied with him before could only bear with it. Thank you. After riding for a while, Xiao Xian dismounted and thanked them. Then he put on his equipment and continued on. After walking through the grassland and crossing a mountain range, he finally saw the scenery he was looking for. Standing high on the mountain, Xiao Xian looked at the dense greenery in the distance and breathed in the moist air. He threw the stone pot on his back and went down the mountain. Chapter 366. After crossing the mountain range, Xiao Xian could clearly feel the difference in climate. There were two completely different climates on both sides of the mountain range. It was as if the humidity and rain on this side were all blocked, preventing them from reaching the dry grassland on the other side of the mountain range. The further down he went, the more familiar Xiao Xian felt. This was his first time here, but this kind of environment always reminded him of the forest in his hunting grounds. Whether it was the forest on the other side of the river where the Yanjiao tribe was originally located, or the forest with ferocious beasts after returning to his homeland, they were all like this. As far as the eye could see, everything was green. It was a place full of vitality and danger. Xiao Xian's excitement was faintly overjoyed. He didn't know if it was because he was in a familiar environment, or because he was getting closer and closer to the Yanjiao tribe that he had been separated from for nearly 1,000 years. As he walked down the mountain, Xiao Xian threw away the exaggerated necklace made of beast claws and ox horns that he was wearing around his neck. He had already used up all the weapons he could use, and the necklace was just a trophy he had obtained from hunting. He also threw away the stone pot on his back that he used to boil soup. At this time, it was no longer a pretense but a burden. In a place like the mountain forest, he had to be more careful. He had to be as light as possible so that it was easier to hide and avoid. It had been more than half a year since Xiao Xian entered the desert. It was the first time he had been in such a mountain forest in such a long time. Taking a deep breath, Xiao Xian was surrounded by the moist smell of vegetation. He could hear the sounds of various birds, beasts, and insects. He lightened his footsteps and integrated himself into this new environment step by step. The wide river meandered through the dense forest into the distance. If one stood on a tree, they would be able to see figures swimming under the river from time to time. Sometimes it was some dark-colored fish, and sometimes it was some giant hunters lurking under the river, such as giant pythons. Xiao Xian sensed for a while. Although it wasn't as obvious as the fire seed, he could vaguely determine the location of the Yanjiao tribe. He took out the bone ornament around his neck that symbolized his status as an elder and looked at it. He touched the fiery red ball in the middle of the ornament and thought to himself, I wonder if I can use this identity in the Flaming Horn tribe. Do they still recognize me? Xiao Xian gathered his energy and continued to move in that direction. There were some traces of human activity here. Sometimes there were pieces of cloth, and sometimes there were some incomplete weapons that had been abandoned here. Xiao Xian even saw a human bone under a big tree. It was probably left behind by a beast after a hunter was killed here. After carefully identifying the traces around him, Xiao Xian quickly assessed the various creatures in this place. His footsteps were cautious but not slow. There was a well-camouflaged snake on a branch. At first glance, it was difficult to see that there was a poisonous creature lying in ambush. When Xiao Xian passed by, it wanted to bite him. Unfortunately, Xiao Xian was too fast and didn't give it any time to prepare. In the blink of an eye, he passed by under the tree. The snake lurking on the branch flicked its tongue, adjusted its posture, and continued to wait for the next prey to pass by. In addition to some tools used by humans, Xiao Xian also saw drawings carved on branches and stones. He didn't know which tribe had carved them. Some of the drawings were similar to totems, some were carved with words, and some were written with the names of the prey they had hunted, as if to show off their strength. Xiao Xian glanced at them. He recognized the words, but he didn't see any familiar drawings. The style was also unfamiliar. It seemed that they were from other tribes. The Yanjiao people should be farther away and didn't come here often. Since there were people moving around, Xiao Xian not only had to guard against the ferocious beasts lurking everywhere in the forest, but he also had to be vigilant against other people. Sometimes people were more ferocious than ferocious beasts. After entering the forest, the deeper he went, the denser and thicker the trees became. Walking on the soft ground below, he could only feel a little yangguang cast by the dense branches. On the third day of setting foot in this forest, Xiao Xian was walking in the forest when he suddenly felt a pair of eyes staring at him with a murderous intent. Although the other party tried to hide it, the murderous intent was too strong. With Xiao Xian's hunting experience, he keenly sensed it. He just didn't know if the other party was a human or a ferocious beast. Since the other party didn't move for the time being, Xiao Xian didn't take the initiative to attack. Instead, he continued to walk forward, wanting to see how the owner of the eyes hiding in the dark would act. Picking up his pace, Xiao Xian shuttled through the forest. That gaze was still following him closely. The other party's movements weren't slow, and they were good at hiding. If one looked around, they wouldn't be able to find the other party's figure at all. However, when the other party was in hot pursuit, Xiao Xian could clearly hear the sound of a sharp weapon cutting through tree trunks. Even if the sound was very soft, it could be easily covered by the sound of shaking branches. Another gust of wind blew, and the dense branches and leaves in the surrounding forest swayed. The friction between the leaves made a rustling sound. Occasionally, there was the sound of birds flying or landing. Identifying the movement behind him from the various sounds, Xiao Xian picked up his pace again. Like a nimble wind, he shuttled through the forest. His feet made several sharp turns, changing directions. After the seventh sharp turn, Xiao Xian found a large tree nearby. With a leap, he nimbly leaped up the tree and hid in the dense foliage. There were some flying insects resting on the tree. A colorful insect was resting on the treetop. Xiao Xian's sudden jump scared it so much that it almost rolled off the leaves. Behind Xiao Xian, a slender figure shot towards Xiao Xian like an arrow through an unnoticeable crack in the rough bark. If this kind of insect bit a person, it would drill straight into the person's body. Xiao Xian didn't even turn his head. He casually snapped off a branch and threw it at the insect. The branch had a sharp edge, and it directly nailed the insect to the thick bark. The insect that was nailed to the bark twisted its body, as if trying to break free from the fate of being nailed to the tree, but it was powerless. Xiao Xian didn't even look at the insect. His ears carefully listened to the small cutting sounds that were quickly approaching. His eyes were fixed in the direction of the sound. A brown figure flashed like a shadow. When it passed by a tree, it paused for a moment and then left at an even faster speed. As if sensing that Xiao Xian was deliberately hiding, The brown figure suddenly circled around a tree when it was about to reach the tree that Xiao Xian was at. Then it disappeared behind the tree. Xiao Xian frowned slightly. His eyes were fixed in that direction, but his attention was focused on his surroundings. The other party was indeed watching him. He was also very smart, sharp, and very good at hiding. Xiao Xian clenched the black dagger in his hand and focused. A figure suddenly circled around the tree trunk behind Xiao Xian. A sharp, cold light burst out, neatly cutting through the branches and leaves in front of it. A threatening, murderous aura instantly filled the small space in the tree. With a cruel intent, the sharp light drew an arc and swept directly towards Xiao Xian. Chapter 367. Xiao Xian immediately jumped away from the tree the moment his opponent appeared. This opponent was not suited for close combat. If he got too close, Xiao Xian would only be at a disadvantage. His opponent was agile and had a natural advantage. It was a strange-looking animal. It looked like a brown monkey, but it was not. Its limbs were long and agile, and its feet and toes were long. Its claws were as sharp as sickles and could be retracted into its toes like a cat. When it waved its arms, it looked like a whip with a blade attached to its front end. When it moved stealthily, it would retract its claws and move stealthily. When it waved its claws at Xiao Xian, the ferocity in its eyes and the fangs in its mouth showed that this ferocious animal was in a state of resentment. It did not look like it was facing its prey, but more like it was facing its enemy. This made Xiao Xian very puzzled. This animal was very smart. It was not big, but it was a real dire beast. The emotion in its eyes was too strong. Xiao Xian could not ignore it even if he wanted to. It was his first time in this place, and he did not know how he had offended it. As he came down from the tree, the sharp edges behind him closed in. Amidst the threatening murderous aura, the cold gleam of the sharp claws was like an angry slaughterer waving the scythe of the grim reaper, eager to reap all life. The dense intertwining of claws made Xiao Xian unable to find a good opportunity to counterattack. Xiao Xian stomped his feet on the ground and left his original position, leaving a pit in the ground. The surrounding soft soil and leaves splashed up, turning into debris as the claws approached. Xiao Xian quickly ran through the dense forest. The pursuer behind him was still in a strong mood, and it could not wait to pounce on him. Xiao Xian was already very fast, but this time, his opponent had no intention of hiding. It also gave chase, and Xiao Xian did not leave it far behind. It was agile, fast, and every strike carried a strong murderous aura. Its claws were many, long, and sharp. It was also very clever. It seemed to be familiar with humans. What was the best way to deal with such a ferocious beast? There seemed to be a tense atmosphere in the dense forest because of this chase. The other beasts did not intend to intervene, and they could not keep up with the speed of the two. The sound of tree trunks being cut rang out again. The ferocious beast was using the tree trunks to increase its speed. The louder the sound of tree trunks being cut, the greater the force used by the other party. It was still accelerating. He was probably annoyed by Xiao Xian running around and couldn't wait any longer. With the way the other party cut it, if it was a slightly thinner tree trunk, it would probably have been cut in half. Cut the tree trunk? Xiao Xian slightly slowed down his speed, and with a quick turn, the totemic power in his body instantly increased. The flame-like totemic patterns almost covered his entire body, and the totemic power in his body rushed to his legs like a flood, causing the muscles in his legs to swell up. After making a sharp turn, Xiao Xian circled around, aimed at a tree, raised his leg and kicked. Crack! The tree trunk, which was as thick as 3 people hugging it, was directly broken. The broken tree trunk crashed directly into the brown ferocious beast that was chasing after him. The ferocious beast that was chasing closely did not expect Xiao Xian to do this. Originally, when Xiao Xian slowed down, it had almost caught up. Its claws were already itching for blood, as if it could drink it in the next moment. However, it was greeted with such a ferocious attack. Bang! The brown figure was sent flying by the broken tree trunk and smashed into the trunk of another tree, letting out a sharp cry. However, although this ferocious beast looked thin, it was still a ferocious beast. Its body was strong, and although it was painful to be hit like this, it was not fatal. It was still a long way from being seriously injured. Xiao Xian wanted to follow up with another attack, but the ferocious beast's reaction was very fast. When it fell from the tree trunk, its front limbs were like soft whips, and it swayed its body to avoid a direct collision with Xiao Xian. The ferocious beast that fell into the grass and retreated a few steps landed on all fours. Its body was tense, and its eyes that were staring at Xiao Xian flashed with a dark light. It seemed to be thinking of something, or perhaps it was weighing the current situation. Just when Xiao Xian thought that it would attack again, he found that the ferocious beast gave up on colliding with him and turned to leave. This was the decision it made after weighing the pros and cons. Perhaps it realized that Xiao Xian was not an easy person to deal with. However, it was too late to leave now. Xiao Xian would not let go of the ferocious beast that attacked him. This time, the roles of the pursuer were reversed. The party that was originally chasing was now eager to escape, and the party that was being chased became the hunter. Crack! 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 From time to time, the sound of tree trunks being kicked could be heard in the forest. Some of the birds resting in the trees were startled and flew away. The originally quiet forest became restless. The ferocious beasts that were walking in that direction twitched their ears, turned around, and left. They did not want to encounter such a barbaric and violent method. Anyway, they were not the unlucky ones, so they would not get involved. The tree trunks that were constantly being kicked off did not directly hit the target every time. But even if they did not hit the target, they still brought some obstruction to the brown ferocious beast. At this time, the ferocious beast was very regretful of provoking this person. It originally only wanted to vent its anger on this person, but it did not expect to hit an iron plate. It had never been afraid of close combat with humans, and it thought that it could still deal with them. Especially when the other party was young and alone, it would be easier to deal with. However, when it encountered a person who directly used a tree trunk as a weapon, no matter how sharp its claws were, it could not cut through such a thick trunk in one go. It was certain that it would be smashed if it could not dodge. Its mind was in a mess, and it could not make the most correct response in the first place. The more chaotic it was, the more it would be smashed. In the forest, Xiao Xian had caught up with the ferocious beast at some point, and he was even a bit ahead of it. Crack! Another tree trunk was kicked off, and the timing was very accurate. It directly hit the ferocious beast from the side. The thick tree trunk with the smell of moss brought a strong wind, as if it was going to blow away everything in its path. The ferocious beast that was hit let out a painful cry again and fell to the ground. The ferocious beast that was hit by the tree trunks did not immediately get up this time. It was hit a little hard. Seeing that the ferocious beast wanted to escape, Xiao Xian picked up the fallen tree trunk next to him and used it as a club to sweep it over. Bang! The ferocious beast that had just stood up was hit again. The ferocious beast that fell to the ground let out a scream. It was no longer the ferocious roar from before, but a series of short cries. Coupled with the pitiful emotion in its eyes, it seemed to be begging for mercy. It even retracted its claws, hugged its head, and curled up there, screaming at Xiao Xian. Seeing this, Xiao Xian threw away the thick tree trunk, pulled a long vine from a tree, and tied it up. Before the ferocious beast could react, the vine knot had already wrapped around its body. Its whip-like limbs were tied up, and even if it reached out with its claws, it could not immediately cut off all the vines. After tying it up, Xiao Xian grabbed it by the neck and lifted it up. Feeling the 5 fingers around its throat tighten, the ferocious beast with brown fur found it more and more difficult to breathe. It was injured, and with its neck strangled, it was already somewhat powerless. It struggled to move its bound limbs, but it was useless. Lifting the ferocious beast, Xiao Xian wanted to figure out why this ferocious beast was so hostile towards him. Suddenly, his ears twitched. He heard a few rapid footsteps approaching. It was probably the commotion just now that had attracted them. Were they from the nearby tribes? Or was it someone else? These people came quickly. Every one of them was burly, and their steps were hurried. Obviously, they did not expect to see other tribesmen here. The 5 of them stopped when they got close. When they saw the ferocious beast in Xiao Xian's hands, one of them wanted to say something, but was stopped by his companion. Xiao Xian's back was facing them, so the 5 of them could not see Xiao Xian's face clearly. Moreover, Xiao Xian was wearing a cotton garment. To prevent poisonous insects from the forest, Xiao Xian had added some animal skin. Although the cloth and animal skin were somewhat worn out, they blocked most of the totemic tattoos on his arms and legs, so the 5 of them could not see clearly. The 5 of them looked at each other, and the most stable of them stepped forward. Just as he was about to say something, Xiao Xian had already turned around. Seeing the totemic tattoos on Xiao Xian's face that had not yet disappeared, the person who was about to speak was stunned. The corners of his eyes twitched, and the other's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. They were roaring in their hearts. Holy shit, how could there be Yanjiao people here? You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.